Welcome back, everyone. This is your host, the DN WhatIf, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Had the Ace of Cards Quirk? A special shout out to the original creator, fully under squatterproof, knife grind under skishkab, pseudo, knife grind under skishkabeb, Midas was underscratch 3R3. Please make sure to show your support by checking out their work from the description. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku glanced up at the clock, still ticking on the wall. It was his last year of middle school, and Izuku was finally going to be free. He would try out for UA, and he would be a hero. He would help others, those in need. He would be the first quirkless hero. Oh yeah, Midoriya, don't you want to go to UA too? Izuku had never hated the teacher more at that moment. All the eyes of the class turned to him as they burst out laughing. No way. He's quirkless, he can't get into U.A. Izuku shrunk back, resolving himself to his notebook once again. Maybe they'd just leave him alone. It seemed to somewhat work until the end of class. He was quickly shoved to the side as explosions burned his skin. Listen up, Death. Bakugo sneered. You're even worse than the rest of these damn rejects, you quirkless wannabe. You really think they let someone like you in when they could have me? Izuku struggled to stand for a minute, catching his breath for a moment. No way. You've got it all wrong. He gasped out. Really? I'm not trying to compete against you. You gotta believe me. It's just that, I've wanted to be a hero since I was little. I may not have a quirk, but I can still try my hardest, can't I? You'd never be able to hang with the best of the best, you'd die in the exams. Defenseless Izuku, the school's already crappy, you really wanna embarrass it more by failing so hard? Katsuki laughed, eyes darting to the hero analysis for the future notebook discarded on the ground. Huh. One of Bakugo's friends cocked his head to the side, confused. Hero analysis for the future? Don't tell me you're taking notes on how to be a hero. Bakugo laughed again, picking the notebook up. It's so pathetic. He's delusional. Another laughed from behind Katsuki. Hey. Gee, give that back. Izuku cried. He'd spent months on that thing. He watched as it was exploded and thrown out the window. You know, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there actually might be another way. Katsuki pondered, before cracking a psychotic smile. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. Izuku froze like a deer in the headlights. Take a swan dive off the roof? He watched as the group laughed and scampered away, leaving a teary-eyed Izuku on the floor. It took him a while, but he eventually hiked himself up off the floor and out the door. He found his notebook in a water feature, directly outside the classroom window. Just his luck, really. Izuku started his walk home, turning around the corner of the school. He was completely alone, and was probably going to miss his train. That idiot! You can't go around telling people to kill themselves. What if I really jumped, what would he do then? Once again, Izuku froze. What if he really jumped? The thought almost excited him. He was useless, after all. Exactly useless. You could never be a hero. Even your mother hates you. You're quirkless, who wouldn't hate you? It would be so easy, just jump off. A couple of texts, maybe. Just in case somebody missed him. Nobody will miss you. People will celebrate your death. Inko will be so happy, she won't have to waste recourses on a quirkless like yourself. He made a quick right, too caught up in his own thoughts to realize the sludge building up underneath his feet. You'll make a perfect skin suit for me to hide in, kid. Izuku jumped, or he tried to jump. The sludge monster had a tight grip on him, suffocating him. He started fighting it, trying to push and pull. Don't worry, I'm just taking over your body. It'll be easier for both of us if you don't fight back. It will only hurt for a minute. You'll feel better soon. The sludge villain laughed creepily. That's right. You'll finally be gone, you deserve it. You won't burden anyone anymore. Izuku stopped struggling. The darkness was comforting, almost. An odd feeling encased him, a sense of suffocating peace. His throat clogged up. Was this dying? It was sad, really. This villain had such an interesting quirk, after all. He wondered how it worked. Did it encase him, or did he simply turn on command? How did he spring from the ground? Could he have no fear, you are safe? Was that All Might? Holy crap, that was totally All Might. Now that I'm here, that is. All Might added. Now, Texas? Izuku was practically breathless, and not just because he was being suffocated. Smereas. And with that, the villain burst into pieces, dropping a hacking Izuku to the floor. Holy shit, you're All Might. Wait. Izuku called. He needed to ask just one question. All Might, no. Yagi turned to face him. Siege, can I be a hero even without a quirk? The man studied Izuku. He sighed. Pro heroes are always having to risk their lives. Some villains just can't be bitten without powers. So no, I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. Izuku felt tears welling in his eyes as he looked away. If you want to help people, there's plenty of other ways to do it. You can become a police officer. They get crap because the heroes capture most of the villains, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to have a dream, young man. Just make sure your dreams are obtainable, realistic, understand? Yagi continued. And then he left. Izuku raised a sleeve to dab at his eyes. Stupid, thinking All Might of all people would tell you you could be a hero. You heard him. Stop wasting people's time. Izuku stood there for another hour, just thinking. Oh, stop procrastinating, you know how much of a bother you are? Just jump already. End your pointless existence. Izuku took his shoes off. He looked down at his phone. I'll try calling Inko. The phone rung and kept ringing. I'm sorry, the person you're trying to contact is not available right now. So Izuku sent a text. Hey Inko. Sorry about the formalities, but I know you would not wish me to call your mother. I just want you to know that you don't have to worry about me anymore. Start saving for yourself, go rent out a cheaper apartment. You don't need to pay for my tuition either. I won't be around for that. This isn't your fault, I'm sorry for being such a bother. Midoriya Izuku. And that was that. Izuku discarded his uniform's jacket, throwing it with his backpack and shoes. Stepping closer towards the edge of the building, Izuku glanced at his other contact. Katsuki Bakugo. His finger hovered over the contact button. He threw his phone off to the side, making sure it landed on his backpack. After all, Inko could sell it. Give it to someone who deserved it. Maybe he could do something good before he died. Izuku looked down at the street. Almost nobody was there at that moment. Maybe one or two in the alleyway. It was almost 8 o'clock at that point. Who wouldn't be heading home? Izuku wouldn't, of course, but that wasn't important. He wasn't important. And so Izuku turned his back to the world and fell. Quirk, Shadow Walker. Quirk, Quick Spirit. Quirk, Glacier Movements. Quirk, Telekinesis Minor. Quirk, 7 Sins. Combine? Quirk, Shadow Walk. Quirk, Quick Spirit. Quirk, Glacier Movements. Quirk, Minor Telekinesis. Quirk, 7 Sins. Combine? The words glared at Izuku in the darkness. What? Quirks? Combine? This was Izuku's quirk. And it was finally coming in, right after he needed it. How ironic. Izuku looked at the list of quirks. He grinned. There was so much to explore with this quirk. What would he call it? What could he do with it? How did any of it even work? Combining MT and QS, 20% complete. He thought. Guess I'm about to find out. Minor Telekinesis and Quick Spirit combined. New quirk, Spirit of Telekinesis. Quirk type, Psychological. Description, Spirit of Telekinesis. The user may teleport themselves and any objects or beings in a 50-foot radius anywhere else in said radius. Currently unknown. Had Izuku just made a new quirk? The boy opened his eyes again. He was still falling. He panicked for a moment before remembering about Sot. He focused on transporting himself back onto the rooftop. And in a blink-can-you'll-miss-it moment, Izuku was back on the roof. Izuku picked up his phone. Inko hadn't read the text yet. He quietly deleted the text, dropping the phone in his backpack. He put on his jacket and slipped on his shoes. And for the first time in a long time, Izuku had hope. Real hope. The greenette opened the door to Inko's flat, slipping in unnoticed by his supposed parental figure. He knew now more than ever that he wanted to help others. That he needed to help others. Because now Izuku had been at the lowest of the low. He had stood at the edge of the roof and jumped, preparing himself for the fall. Nobody needed to do that ever again. Not in Mutasafa. Not if a certain green-haired boy could help it. Izuku Midoriya was dead. What stood in his place was someone great, someone powerful. Not a hero, no. He couldn't be a hero, not without his license or without having to follow any of those petty rules. Not without having to join such a corrupt system, no. Hello, I'm Proviligant of Hope, Ace. How do you do? Izuku pondered whether or not he'd tell Kaken and the others about his quirk. He decided not to tell them, just accidentally use it in front of them one day. Now how did he tell Inko? Well, he'd do the same thing just the first time he sees her next. That turned out to be the next morning. Izuku, pass the salt this instant. Inko shouted from just the other side of the table. In the past, Izuku would have internally groaned, bit his lip, and passed Inko the salt. But this was the present, and present Izuku was a petty bastard. Sure thing. He simply mumbled, waving his hand. He heard an abrupt gasp and felt his mother's caretaker's eyes on him. That's what told him he hadn't missed his target. Izuku, you dash. Have a quirk? He hummed simply, teleporting his cup into his hand. He had more interesting things to focus on. Like, for example, the drawbacks of his quirk. And if the individual quirks had drawbacks as stated, then would the drawbacks increase as he combined quirks? Could he estimate the severity of the drawback by the previous quirk's drawbacks? How did he discover the drawbacks? How would they affect his body? How did he get more quirks to combine? Izuku how when Inko stuttered out, storing Izuku from his thoughts. I only discovered it last night. It's called Spirit of Telekinesis, he explained calmly, finishing up his homework. Oh my god, Inko muttered, trailing off. Which reminded the greenette, what would he call his quirk? He should probably figured out how it worked before he named it. Do you know how it works? Izuku's caretaker finally asked, tears welling up in her eyes. Yeah. I can teleport any being or object in a 50-foot radius dash. Izuku swallowed part of his granola bar. Anywhere in that 50-foot radius? He finished. That's powerful. Inko whispered. Please, that's just one of them. Izuku thought, smiling. One of them? Inko almost shouted. Izuku gulped. Did he say that out loud? You have more than one quirk? Inko asked breathlessly. Well, yeah. Izuku repeated calmly, standing up. Now if you don't mind, I need to get to school. Wait dash. Izuku had already closed the door behind him. Izuku was never that lucky. He had been registered quirkless for 14 years, after all. So he wasn't entirely surprised when his trip to school was delayed by a mugging. If the young teenager was going to be a vigilante, then he was going to have to start saving people then and there. So he did. Hey, hands off. Izuku shouted, teleporting the man back into the street with his backpack. Don't get involved here, kid. This'll be over in a heartbeat. One of the guys growled, throwing a punch at Izuku. He quickly dodged the punch, just like he'd dodge WhatIf Kaken's explosions. He teleported the goon up on a rooftop with one of the others. He was starting to get tired. He hadn't even started fighting. The other two came at the greenette full force, one swinging a bat at him. Izuku quickly grabbed the bat and teleported it up into a tree. Damn, that's one quirk, kid. The goon growled. Yeah, what's yours? Izuku taunted. Think he's going to give you the upper hand? The other laughed. No, not really. Izuku gritted his teeth, dodging punches. He finally grabbed one of the guys, teleporting them up with the other two. Clever. What'll you do? No dash. The villain was cut off as a certain teenager rammed into him, focusing his energy on tackling him down. While he was temporarily confused, Izuku teleported him onto a different rooftop. And so he left the four of them, finally finishing his walk to school. Izuku quietly made his way into his classroom, 13 minutes late. He endured the snickers from his fellow students and the berating from the teacher, even though he was sure Kaken was at least 5 minutes late. No matter, it was fine. He'd deal with it later. He mostly spaced out, eyes often wandering to his classmates. He was tired, more than he should have been. Blinking, he activated his quirk. Combine quirks. Spirit of telekinesis. Description: the user may teleport themselves and any objects or beings in a 50-foot radius anywhere else in said radius. If used too often, user will become overly exhausted. Oh, that's why he was so tired. Would have been nice to know that beforehand. He'd used it 8 times in less than 24 hours. And 5 of those times he used it on people. Midoriya, are you even listening? The teacher snapped. The green-haired boy quickly looked up and nodded, stopping himself from wincing as laughter filled the classroom. Then answer the problem in the board. Okay. Izuku blinked, eyes darting to the board. He thought. The answer is 4672, ma'am. The teacher muttered something about useless, quirkless students before turning to the board and continuing the honestly unneeded maths lesson. Well, it was unneeded for Izuku. He'd learned this in 4th grade, for Christ's sake. God, today day was going to be long. Izuku ran home, taking the scenic route. He didn't particularly want to talk to his mother at that time, and he had more important things to work on, like his quirk. Like his vigilante work. The teenager had decided that Ace would premiere in about 2 or 3 weeks. He already had a suit in mind, and it was a bit inspired by Eraserhead's costume. Eraserhead had always been Izuku's second favorite hero. He wasn't flashy and he got the work done quickly. Now, however, after hearing what he had heard from All Might, Eraser had been promoted. Izuku would always look up to All Might. He did save people in the end, even if he was somewhat a fraud, but Eraserhead would always take first place. So he got to work sketching in his notebook as he wrapped a bandage around his horrifically burned hand. He was surprised he had no permanent damage, other than some nerve damage, that is. He was Kaken's main target, after all. When Izuku finally arrived home, he was exhausted. He needed to rely less on that particular quirk if he wanted to be a successful vigilante. Opening the door, the first thing he found was a worried Inko Midoriya. "Izuku!" she exclaimed, sitting up straight. "Inko." He nodded. "Listen, we need to dash," Inko started. "Not right now, homework." He dismissed, one eye darting towards the blood bleeding through his bandage. "Is that blood?" Inko asked, distressed. "She only cares because you have a quirk. You don't have any worth, any potential." That was the first time Izuku had heard the voice since last night, which was a good thing. "Yeah, it's fine. Just a burn." Izuku responded blankly. "Who did that?" "That's such an awful thing, Izuku," Inko whispered. "It didn't matter 30 hours ago, why does it matter now?" He laughed quietly, turning to his room. "Aizu," Inko called, but the greenette had already closed the door behind him. It was time to get down to business. If Izuku wanted Ace to premiere within 2 weeks, he'd need to start work on a costume immediately. Figuring out his quirk was equally important, of course, but did you expect him to fight crime in his school uniform? Even he had standards. Either way, the green-haired boy needed his costume immediately. Figuring his quirk out was equally important, but he wasn't going to fight crime in his school uniform, even he had standards. So he needed something that wouldn't limit his mobility and would still add on to his fighting. Plus, it had to look really cool. So Izuku hopped into the internet and ordered some red, black, and dark green fabric. It was to turn up that Tuesday, the following morning. That would give him almost 2 weeks to make his costume and figure out his quirk. God, he was in for quite the ride. The ride started at school the very next day. After Izuku had dropped the fabric off into his room, Inko had made him breakfast, for once, and he'd run off to school before they could even start a conversation. He'd been berated for not doing his classmates' homework in homeroom, and he'd provoked an attack all within the first 2 classes. So he was currently stuck in study hall, blankly staring off into the distance. He wondered what the quirked 7 sins was. Quirk 7 sins. Description: user can inflict the after effects/feelings of one of the 7 sins on any given entity that is conscious. Currently unknown. Well, that's handy, the teenager thought, smiling as the words appeared in his vision. The 7 sins. What a neat name. Izuku might just have to combine that with something. What did he have? Quirk Glacier movements. Description. User can create glaciers of ice that shoot around, melting behind them as they spread. Throws. Currently unknown. Quirk. Shadow walk. Description. User melts into shadows, moving twice as fast as usual. If no shadows are present, user will turn into a shadow. Throws. Currently unknown. Now that was handy. The quirks seemed pretty powerful too. Izuku was well on his way to becoming a vigilante. To bring a hero, license and all. He would go to Udare, and he would become a hero. Even only with spirit of telekinesis, he'd be pretty much set if he could train it to be more powerful. Which reminded him, Izuku, are you even paying attention? Izuku internally groaned, eyes turning up to the teacher with his usual innocent expression. Of course. He smiled, eyes focusing back on the teacher. The teacher almost laughed, but turned back to the board and continued to write notes on it. The others chuckled in the background. God, he was so done with this school. What, now you think you're better than them? Izuku almost winced as the voice spat at him. How pathetic, you're so useless. Yeah, sure. He had more important things to deal with, anyway. Izuku walked out of his final class, resentment for the school resurfacing as he was finally released. Well, that was until Kaken closed the door of the classroom before he could. So, Deku, you're still signing up for U.A? Bakugo sneered. He noted that Kaken was alone for this, it was just the two of them. In a classroom. God, Izuku was so done with middle school. Yeah, problem? He asked haughtily, surprising the angry blonde. Ah yes. He growled angrily, staring up at Izuku. You're quirkless. You die in the entrance test. Those words are just thrown around so much, aren't they? Izuku asked incredulously, eyes shining with curiosity. Quirkless? No, it's not. Just to Dekus like you. Katsuki raged. Oh yes, my nickname. Izuku murmured, closing his eyes for a moment. You have me that, didn't you? Saw it on a bucket I was holding and decided it meant useless. Kaken blinked at him, trying to make sense of the situation. Glad to see you still remember that. Where are you even going with this? Bakugo shouted. Oh, do hush up. Izuku smirked. The joke had gone on long enough. He simply raised a hand as his backpack shot into it. He watched his childhood friend stumble back, eyes wide. The greenette gave him a smile. You need to research before you make such bold claims. And then he was off. Okay, maybe showing Kaken he had a quirk was not the best idea. Izuku would admit, he had gotten angry when he was confronted. He shouldn't have given in and used his quirk at school at all, and definitely not around Kaken. Izuku panicked, quickly trying to outrun the blonde, who was currently very, very angry. Get back here, you nerd. Explain. Katsuki shouted, chasing after the distressed greenette. I need to get away, and quickly. Izuku thought. He needed to get out of there or overpowered Kaken. Which just wasn't going to happen. Then, while running through particularly dubious streets, an idea came to mind. He took a quick right into an alleyway and merged with the shadows. What? Nerd, where'd you go? Katsuki shouted angrily. He'd wanted an answer for this. Izuku slipped around the corner, following underneath the shade of the trees. Some of the shadows looked a little odd when he passed by them, and he noted how he wasn't affected by the sun, so it appeared he stayed as the shadow he joined into, including the state. Other than that, he was just walking in the shade. He understood why the quirk was called Shadow Walker. It was hard not to. Izuku finally slipped out of the shadows when he recognized his apartment. He dodged into the building and continued up the staircase, grabbing the package by his door as he went. Finally slipping through the hallway, Izuku found his caretaker waiting for him in the kitchen. Izuku, I heard you, Inko faltered, looking Izuku up and down. Izuku raised an eyebrow, daring Inko to finish that sentence. She gulped. Aizu, what happened to, who burned you? She finally muttered out. Izuku could have laughed. If he hadn't just outrun Kaken, used a new quirk for the first time, dealt with the voice in his head, and kept up with the usual torment at school, he'd be rolling on the floor. Inko Midoriya was concerned about a small burn on his cheek. She'd done worse. She was concerned about how little he weighed. She deprived him of food and water. She was concerned about how little help he seemed to need. She'd beaten him if he got anything less than an. She'd put up with your uselessness, she'd taken on your burden, she'd punished you accordingly. The voice could get very annoying sometimes. It's just a small burn. Izuku simply answered, voice devoid of emotion. He had things to do, things that weren't bothering Inko. I'll clean it up later. He turned around and headed to his room. Inko was mad. The brat had a quirk. A kind of teleporting telekinesis quirk. And more, so it seemed. On top of that, he refused to tell her anything and continued to come home with burns and bruises. She'd continue to play the concerned adult, of course. Izuku's quirk was strong, easily a hero's quirk. He could bring her glory. But he at least had to make her dinner, the brat. Izuku applied the final bandage over the burn lotion, pressing it down slightly. He winced at the sudden pain, but quickly recovered and slipped out of the bathroom. He grabbed his package that rested on top of his bed and grabbed the blood-stained box cutter from his desk. He quickly slashed at the box, not realizing he was also taking his anger out on his hand until it was bleeding. Oh, bloody hell! Izuku murmured, grabbing a couple of other bandages. Why was he so clumsy all the time? You're so useless, Izuku. Finally, he managed to stop the bleeding and finish opening the package. He smirked when he saw the fabric he ordered, the red poking through the depths of black and green. Now he simply needed to create it, and he already had a few ideas. He wouldn't admit it, but it had been somewhat inspired by both Robin's outfit and the Joker's. They had the same sort of vibe Izuku wanted, and the Joker's colors were green and purple. Either way, Izuku was happy with the design he'd chosen. The outfit seemed fitting for his optimal night patrols, and it covered his face. Now all he needed was the voice changer, but that wasn't due to arrive until the next day. He had a while to make the costume before he had to install the voice changer, but it wasn't that long. He should probably start working on it before it was too late. Quickly grabbing some thread, Izuku went over to the sewing machine that his caretaker kept in his room, extra storage space, and started on his vigilante costume. The design consisted of a basic black form, with green designs draped over it and a red ace sewn onto the top. He had a mask covering his face with some shaded glass he'd found cheap. It would cover his eyes but allow him optimal vision, which was exactly what he needed. The voice changer would be connected to a mouthpiece, the thing around his neck in his hero costume, with a red ace symbol printed on it which he would drape a cloth over the inside of to give his identity more protection. His hair would be covered with a hood that wouldn't come down unless you pushed in a certain way, meaning his identity would be a complete secret. Izuku ran the idea through his head as he managed to not kill his hands with the sewing machine, threading the fabric together. Keeping the idea fresh was important to him. It helped him with the design. He had experience from the hundreds of times he came back with a burnt or somehow destroyed uniform that Inko had refused to replace. All he had to do was survive the rest of the year. He would get into it, and he would become a hero, the legal way or not. Well, it sure as hell wasn't the legal way. The next few days were hard for Izuku, and Kaken didn't lay off on the bullying, and if anything, it got worse. His voice changer arrived a day later than was expected, and he got there to grab it just before Inko laid eyes on it. She'd gotten worse too. She wasn't physical anymore, but she expected him to make dinner and clean the apartment, and was just generally negative towards the poor greenette. However, he finally had all the things he needed for his costume, and he just needed to fix the hood, wire up the voice changer, and get some weapons for self-defense. If it was up to Izuku, he'd be getting himself a capture weapon like Eraserhead, but he didn't know what the weapon was made out of, though he hypothesized that it was a kind of wool fiber mixed with some sort of metallic substance. And if he got the materials wrong, it could be disastrous, not just for him but also for the people involved. So he needed either a gun or some knives. Izuku is not dumb. Far, far from it. He's exceptionally observant and always top of his class, second only to Kaken, and only because the first time he surpassed him, see first grade, he didn't ever really lessen the severity of his attacks. The boy decided to let him have first, even if he had to settle for second. He knew if he killed or did permanent damage to another, he'd never forgive himself. He needed something that was somewhat non-lethal. Besides, guns were hard to come by and you needed multiple licenses to be permitted to buy one, and they were expensive. He'd never find enough money in time for his debut. So knives were the easy option. Much easier to hide too. They were less expensive, they weighed less, and not just on his consciousness, and he knew a great defense shop that sold them. He was good friends with their cashier. Now he just actually needed the knives. Carefully walking into the store, Izuku made sure to draw no attention. He'd learned from years of experience that it was better to not be seen at all than to be seen and recognized later. With how rare his status was, they would assume he had a quirk. When they found out otherwise, they'd assume he had been trying to keep up a double life. Ironic, considering he was just planning on how to smoothly run his new double life. Izuku-an? What do you need? Satsumi greeted, slightly confused. Just started a part-time in a rough part of downtown, Satsumi-san. Izuku smiled softly. Oh, I got you. Satsumi nodded in understanding, going round the back of the counter. Satsumi's quirk was called Selling Teller. Her quirk let her see the relationships of everyone she sold something to. She was bullied throughout middle school, had a much better experience at high school, however, for her useless quirk, and was shunned by a lot of people because of her quirk. When Izuku said rough part of downtown, Satsumi knew what was up. Come over here, I got some new stock in just a week or so ago. What are you looking for? She asked, leading the greenette towards the selection. Probably a starter's set, Izuku admitted. Maybe something more for melee, though. I have just what you need. Satsumi smiled down at him. The younger shivered slightly, the smile reminded him of the Cheshire Cat. We have a beginning set of throwers for 2,803 yen, and then we can present you with this. She held out a palette of sharper, longer-bladed knives. For 3,235 yen. Izuku's eyes widened. These were extremely cheap for the kind of knives they were offering. The catch? He asked, raising his eyes in mock suspicion. Satsumi laughed. No catch, those two for 6,038 yen. Oh, Satsumi, thank you. Izuku smiled. The real question was if he had 6,038 yen on him. After falling asleep at the sewing machine, twice, Izuku decided he should probably take a quick break. He deserved it, he'd been working hard all afternoon and his costume was nearly done. The clock showed 3:46 a.m. Blinking rapidly, Izuku stared at the clock. When had it gotten so late? Well, so early. At least he'd made dinner for Inko before he stayed up all night working. It's not morning yet. The voice reminded him. Damn it, you can't even tell time right. How will you ever amount to anything if you keep screwing up like this? Gulping, the greenette shook his head and grabbed a packet of walnuts that Inko had left on the kitchen counter. The room was shrouded in darkness, and Izuku almost thought he could make out a shape in the far corner, but he was definite it was but a towel. The pristine counters looked faded in the bluish light of the clock, the stars twinkling around outside. The stars he'd yearned to see, to reach out and touch. The stars that were free, the stars that were beautiful. He'd have the walnuts and then continue his work. His costume was important, it was a big part of his life, or would be as a vigilante. He'd get to sleep soon enough anyway, it would be just a few more minutes of work. Yes. It better not be. The voice really needed to stop talking. It had not been just a few minutes. Izuku ended up staying awake working on his costume all night, sewing the loose ends and looping thread through the now properly jammed hood. School would have been a nightmare if he hadn't had a doctor's appointment and got to stay home. Hello, you are Izuku Midoriya, correct? The doctor, Dr. Sylph, asked. Yeah, that's me. Izuku nodded, smiling at the doctor. Inko is concerned about bodily damage. The doctor raised an eyebrow at that, writing something down on the clipboard she held. Yes, Inko-chan is indeed concerned about a number of burns and scars that you have seemingly collected over your time in middle school. Dr. Sylph agreed, nodding carefully. Yes, the scars. Maybe she was concerned about the knife scars littered up his arms, or the burn scars littering his back and neck, or the disfigured scars swerving down the back of his right calf. It was least likely to be the ones made by knives. Most disappeared over time and they were his best-kept secret. He highly doubted Inko knew about those. Can I dash? Look. I have one on my calf down here dash. Izuku almost tripped, but kept steady on his feet and hauled his right leg onto the table. I think it's one of the worst. Or better, depending on if you count by area damaged or singular amount of damage. It is possibly the one on my lower back could count as the worst if we're going by area damaged. And I'm rambling again, sorry, I'll shut up now. He blushed, slightly mortified, snapping his mouth shut. Dr. Sylph looked extremely worried as he examined the now obvious burn mark. Did your mother do this? She asked, worry evident in her tone. Izuku grit his teeth slightly before relaxing them. No, Inko was not the cause of this. The teenager said shortly, tone as blank as he could make it. The doctor, who Izuku quite liked actually, nodded, writing another note down on her clipboard. Then who was? Now that was the question the Greenette had been dreading the most. On one hand, Kaken could be expelled, suspended at the very least, maybe even arrested. He'd never get into U.A with that kind of record, and that meant the world would never see pro-hero Katsuki Bakugo, #1. On the other hand, Izuku would tell someone. He'd be able to get rid of all the pain and bullying. Don't be selfish. The voice hissed. Katsuki would be the best hero. He'd be #1. Don't you dare take that away from the public. Izuku internally flinched. Think of the consequences. He might have to go into the system, they might mark Inko a negligent parent and whisk him away. He didn't deserve Inko, he didn't deserve any of this. I got dashed, he stuttered over his words, hanging his head. Closing his eyes, Izuku took a deep breath and looked up again. I got too close to a villain attack one day. Endeavor was trying to rescue a captive. The fire got a little too close for comfort. The classic blame the fiery bastard. That was one trick Izuku was okay with using. What an excuse for a pro-hero. Damn. Sylph-chan whispered, shaking her head. Don't get close to those, yeah? Yeah. Sorry, I just he gulped. I wasn't being careful. It was my fault really? Izuku stuttered out. Hey, it's okay. Listen, I'm going to prescribe you some burn cream and painkillers. What's your quirk, kid? Sylph asked. Izuku pondered this question for a moment. It's called Ace of Cards. He smiled, looking up at her. It has no contradictions. Quirk, Ace of Cards. Weaknesses, none. Izuku was not looking forwards to Friday. Between his late-night study and his doctor's appointment, school would just be genuinely awful. But Aldra Junior High had a 2-day absent policy with no exceptions. That rule was for Izuku only, apparently, so he had to be there or it'd be a strike against him. It would be his 3rd strike and would result in suspension. The painkillers at least helped with his aching back. Facing Kaken again after the incident had been hard, but it seemed nothing had changed. He just had to not be cornered alone by the boy. However, this was easier said than done. Katsuki had been trying to corner the Greenette the entire week, and Izuku was scared for the outcome. Not that he wasn't usually terrified by anything Kaken did. Well, he'd just have to endure it. Entering homeroom, the same events played out like always. He purposely tripped over every leg. Acknowledged but never answered their jeers and laughs. Swept the spider lily off his desk. Wait, when had that become a usual part of his schedule? That hadn't been. That wasn't a usual event at the start of the year. But he can remember sweeping the floor of the table and into the trash can next to it on Wednesday, and on Tuesday, and every day since. Every day since Christmas. The voice taunted. Is that how long they've wanted you dead? They've wished you dead? He hadn't even realized. He was glad he'd sat down before he'd had this little panic. It could have been so much worse. It could always be so much worse. Could be so much better. You could be dead. No, he couldn't think like that. What? The truth? The voice was starting to sound an awful lot like Kaken. He wasn't doing well that day, huh? Izuku rounded a corner and swerved into the bathroom. It's where he always went, everybody knew that. Kaken knew that. Kaken's gang knew that. Izuku didn't much like the restroom, but it was the easiest place to serve justice. So he waited. But instead of the 4 of them, Kaken and his gang, it was just one. It was just Kaken. Fuck, it was just Kaken. The blonde shouted, growling angrily. Kaken. How when the Greenette gulped. Why are you here? You know why I'm here, you shitty nerd. Bakugo shouted, eyes raging. Izuku flinched. You see dash, spit it out. I dash, just tell me already. My quirk manifested last week. Izuku finally shouted. He was glad they were on the other side of school from the cafeteria, otherwise someone would have heard him. I was a late bloomer. It manifested when I tried dash, the words died in his mouth. He'd almost told Bakugo about his suicide attempt. Of all the people. Talking about Bakugo. The boy stood still, obviously seething with rage, but it was duller. He looked almost surprised. When you tried to what? He finally asked, eyes not leaving the cowering greenette. When you tried to die, but couldn't even bring yourself to do that. When dash Izuku's throat was dry. When I dodged a knife. A good enough excuse. A mugging would be his quirk manifestation. Yes, seemed simple enough. Apparently, a good enough one to get Katsuki to drop him. A knife? The boy scoffed. Yeah, mugging. Izuku answered shortly. What a dumb quirk. Can't even manifest right? Can't even die right. The voice really needed to stop talking. I dash. Leave it, shitty nerd. No one will believe you have a quirk anyway. Go jump off a roof. Same advice as last week. Didn't anything ever get old to Kaken? Yeah, sure. Izuku muttered before watching Bakugo leave the bathroom, the door swinging wildly behind him. Huffing, the vigilante-to-be steadied the door before heading outside to have his lunch. Maybe he'd get some peace and quiet then. Izuku picked up his pace when he heard shouting. Lunch wasn't over for another 43 minutes, and his whole thing was helping people in need. Turns out the situation struck a little closer to home than he would have liked. There was a group of maybe 7 students, all crowded around shouting at another student for seemingly no reason. A few small stones were being thrown at the purple-haired student who currently looked annoyed and slightly withdrawn. Bullying in all its form. Hey! He shouted, voice a little angrier than he would have liked. The students turned around in surprise. They'd thought they wouldn't be found behind Aldra Junior High at lunchtime. It would have been a fair assumption if Izuku hadn't gone there. The hell are you doing? He's a villain. His quirk dash. I don't give a flying fuck what his quirk is. Leave him alone. Izuku shouted. The students quickly scattered, leaving the surprised purple-haired boy leaning on the wall. The brick was undoubtedly uncomfortable, so Izuku helped him stand. You okay? Why did you do that? The boy asked, narrowing his eyes at the middle schooler in front of him. Because they were being mindless idiots, of course, why else? Izuku replied. The other teen snorted. My quirk is brainwashing. If you answer a question I use my quirk on, you'll be under my control. The boy readied himself for the reaction. Izuku's head snapped back, and purple hair sighed. Really? Izuku asked, grinning. The other nodded. That is so cool. How does it work? Can you fight it, or is it an immediate stick? Do you know how useful that would be in hostage situations? No wonder you have a Udata pamphlet. Purple hair wasn't expecting that. What? He asked in confusion. You're not afraid? No way. That's such a heroic quirk. The other blinked at him. You're the first person to ever say that to me. What? Izuku gasped. But your quirk is so cool. Think of how many people it can help. Others think it's villainous. Purple hair sneered. Well, I don't. Izuku smiled, presenting his hand to the other. I'm Izuku Midoriya. What's your name? The boy smiled back at him. Shinso Hitoshi. Nice to meet you, Midoriya-kun. So, what's your quirk? Shinso asked, swallowing a bite of the salami sandwich he had. It's called Ace of Cards. Izuku smiled. Interesting name. What does it do? Absolutely no idea. Izuku admitted, before catching Shinso's glance of confusion. I was a late bloomer, my quirk manifested last week. I've been quirkless my entire life, and Shinso stared. Wow. He whistled. Must be wild getting your quirk now, huh? Oh, it is, trust me. It's absolutely crazy. Izuku agreed, nodding his head before pausing. I've been meaning to ask, is there any way to see your quirk coming? Other than the questions, does your voice have another tone to it? I don't know, does it? Shinso grinned. Well, you basta dash. Izuku stopped mid-laugh, eyes glazing over with white. Izuku blinked. Hell yes, 2 sandwiches. Shinso-kun. Izuku whined, eyes full of amusement. Did it have another tone? Shinso asked, steering the conversation away from the now his sandwich. It didn't. Other than the fact it has to be a question and answer, your quirk seemingly has no forthcoming. Other than the whole villainous quirk thing, does your quirk have any drawbacks? I know in rare cases there aren't, so I thought I'd ask. Izuku stopped his short ramble, eyes turning back up to Shinso who had stopped eating his, Izuku's, sandwich to give the boy a pointed look. As far as I'm aware, the only drawback is the number of people I can control. I can control 3 people at a time, but with the training U.A gives? Shinso trailed off. Hey, I'm trying for the hero course in U.A too. We'll be friends before we even meet in class. Izuku laughed excitedly. Hey, we are not friends, you're some random guy who showed up and started talking? Shinso said, ignoring Izuku's protests. What? Come on, U.A buddies. The greenette pouted. No, I've known you for 36 minutes. Shinso shook his head. Stubborn bastard? Izuku grumbled. Shinso grinned at him in response. Sure buddy. Now, I need to get back to Nob. I'll text you at some point. Shinso said, getting up and throwing the plastic cases the sandwiches came from in the corresponding trash cans. I need to go back to Aldous. Text you later. Izuku smiled, hopping back to school. Hopefully he wouldn't be too late. Izuku dashed home that afternoon, swinging straight through the entrance to his apartment and into his room, not even giving Inko the chance to remind him about dinner. He'd already made dinner, and it just annoyed him further anyway. He wouldn't even be home at that time, anyway. Not when Ace was premiering that night. Izuku slipped off his usual uniform top, making sure to properly undo the tie before tracing a light hand over a scar on his shoulder. Izuku wasn't embarrassed or ashamed of his scars, no, but others were not as lenient about them. No, Inko hadn't been. Glancing down at his scarred hand, the greenette almost flinched. A perfect starburst scar, presented right on the top of it. It was the one scar he was uncomfortable with. It was the first one Katsuki had delivered when the duo were just 5 years old. Izuku wasn't one to dwell on the past, however. Not on such insignificant items like scars, only the justice that they carried on them. The justice he had rightfully been served. That didn't matter anymore. Now, he was going to save people. He was going to save those the heroes in the daylight forgot to save. He would be the hope that combated the dark, the petty criminals' bellow that grew into the big villains the pros fought would be squashed earlier on. He'd never be charged with vigilantism. As far as everyone else was aware, he was quirkless. He'd use Shadowwalker as a spy quirk, he'd use it to assess situations before he attacked. They'd never know he had that one. He'd use Spirit of Telekinesis to get his defensive weapons and quirk-canceling cuffs. He'd steal them from the police, faster, but according to everyone else he'd just trained for a long time. In a way he had. He'd been fighting mini-villains and their quirks since he was 4. Finally, Izuku slipped on his costume. He was delighted when the hood worked exactly as designed, locking in place. He grasped the mask and attached it to the hood, blinking as he peered through the glass. He could see just about everything he normally could, the sides slightly blocked. Alrighty, we are testing the, oh what the heck is my voice what dash Izuku laughed. The voice changer sure as hell did its job. His voice was deeper, made him sound more 16 than 14, but it was lighter and a little smoother. Izuku smirked. Time to go kick some criminal ass? The greenette jumped across the rooftop, never missing a jump. He'd had enough practice dashing around the school to dodge Kakin and the others as well as the intense stakes. It was never life or death, but sometimes he wished it was when he fell. Either way, it was really coming in handy at that moment. Hey! Ace immediately changed directions for the sound of the shout, dashing up a fire escape. A young woman was wrestling with another woman who had been trying to steal her purse. The dastardly lady, hey, he's giving them nicknames, was starting to get a little too aggressive for Ace's liking. He dashed forwards to pull dastardly lady off of the victim, only to realize why she was getting more aggressive. She had a knife. Hey, those things are dangerous, you know. Ace snarked. Dastardly gasped as he grabbed her hand, twisting it and effectively disarming her. He quickly pushed her away to help the other, handing the lady her purse. "Shit, you okay?" "Why yeah, just a siege cut," she responded, grabbing her bag. Who are you?" "Ace, your local vigilante of hope," he answered, helping her up. "You live in this building?" "Yeah, I do." "Thanks." The lady nodded, swerving into the apartment building. Izuku watched her go, then leapt onto the next roof, continuing to dash across the cityscape. He slipped down the fire escape and continued on his route, dodging the chimneys and other rooftop accessories in his way. This could work. The night was uneventful until 3:46 a.m. Ace had been patrolling. He'd stopped another mugging and 2 bar fights, making acquaintance with the local bartender. The usual first-day vigilante stuff. Then he'd rounded an alleyway and found a group of 4 being kidnapped. There were 2 teen girls. They seemed to be about 16 or 17, and they were being accompanied by 2 other men, both seemed about 20. They were surrounded by 7 others, and though they were putting up a fight, it wasn't enough, and they were slowly being dragged through the connection of alleyways. 6 of the other 7 wore black masks, covering their faces. The other wore a red mask that only covered his mouth. He had some sort of mutant quirk that was fueled by concrete. Hard to defeat, Ace didn't have anything to combat that. The only other obvious quirks were a net quirk that one had and a paralysis quirk that worked with eye connection. Like eraser heads, but paralysis, Izuku noted. "Human trafficking is illegal, you know," Izuku called, slipping out of the shadows. The 7 rounded on him. "Look who wants to play hero." One sneered. "Gonna save the little captives?" "First of all, wow, that's just rude," Izuku noted, jumping into a neat handspring out of the way of a net. That was net quirk guy, and then bouncing back into a fight formation. "And second of all, the vigilante jumped legs first into a villain's chest, grabbing his knife with sot and slamming the back into the guy's temple. The nets around them disappeared as Netquirk fell unconscious. Yes. The others startled in confusion before yelling about, one charging at him with a knife. "Oh shit." The man came at him with a quick slice near his arm, veering slightly when Izuku dodges left and grabs his arm. Before he can be disarmed, Paralysis Man slammed into Izuku's back, sending him careering into the wall. Bouncing back, but not making eye contact, Izuku sprung into a cartwheel and spun closer towards the villain, waiting for an opening. He got the opening he wanted when the Paralysis Man reached to grab him. The vigilante buried the knife into his arm, the villain howling in pain as Izuku incapacitated the man, dealing a quick blow to the temple, like Kaken had done. Damn, even that bar fight was harder than this. Izuku taunted. Angry villains were careless villains, and careless villains didn't focus on the victims. "Shut up, you brat. I'll bash your head in," one shouted, yielding a bat above the greenette's head. Ace easily sidestepped AMD, grabbed the bat, flipped it over his head and out of the older's hands, and then used Tuas to get rid of it, all out of the civilian's view, of course. "Oh, now look who's got a temper," Ace snarked. "Gonna tell mommy how you beat up innocents? Image how proud she'll be. 3 down, 4 to go." "Mow," Ace hissed, spinning on the attacker. Was the knife really Nexus or Dash? Izuku went flying into the nearest wall as the villain blew a huge gust of wind, slightly dazed from the attack. A versatile wind quirk. How interesting. He wondered how far the wind could go, how long he could keep it up. But that wasn't the important thing. No, the important thing was the captives. Taking a quick glance at them, they were all cowering against a wall while Ace took care of the attackers. "Couldn't even let me finish?" Ace grumbled, flipping straight of the wall. "Now that is rude." He grabbed the villain's arm and used it to smash into the one behind him before running out of momentum and flipping off of him, landing neatly on the ground in front of the cowering victims. "I would back away from them, little boy," the red-masked warned. "Oh, he was the Windquirk dude. Interesting. My name isn't Little Boy." Ace responded coldly, barely grabbing the villain's hand to stop another knife attack. "Name's Ace, I'm your worst nightmare." "Who are you working for?" The villain laughed. "Oh, don't worry about that. Worry about making it out alive with the citizens." And so Ace lumped. He leapt straight into the guy's face, injuring him badly enough for him to stumble and fall. That cleared a way for the victims to leave. "Run." Ace shouted. Call the police, I'll be fine. They stood still for a moment before one of the men took off running, which prompted the other three to make their way down the alley. Hey! One of the villains started to give chase, but Ace bonked him into the wall, effectively dizzying the man and impairing his vision. While he was distracted, Ace used sought to attach quirk-canceling cuffs to the man's hands. He jumped into the man's back, springing off of it and into the other one, using his knife to stab Yugai's shoulder, distracting him enough to become more vulnerable to temple hits. Izuku knocked him out too, meaning it was a 2v1. What are you going to do now, little vigilante? Nowhere to run, the leader purred, eyes glinting manically. They were right, Izuku couldn't run, and he was getting too tired to fight. Damn it. Then the police arrived. What? The villain hissed, eyes leaving Ace for a second. Just a second. But it was all Ace needed. He sent a kick straight into the man's head, sending him into the wall, unconscious. Who the hell are you? The other whispered, staring at the boy. I've already told you that. Izuku smirked, cuffing the red-masked man. Ace, I'm the vigilante of hope. And you're never going to get away with this again. When Shinso heard police sirens, he wasn't that worried. Crime was a common occurrence in the quirked world they lived in, so there was no reason to panic. No, nothing to worry over. But that was before he heard what people were saying. Some kid, a new vigilante by the name Ace. Yeah, Ace, he took down 7 guys from a mafia downtown. Yeah, I know. He saved some people who called the cops. A kidnapping. Apparently one broke up with the boss's son or something. Yeah, I don't know. I heard he's only 16. I wish my son. Is he a guy? Is it a he? I think they said he. I wish my son was doing stuff like that at 16. 7 guys? Mustafa hadn't had a vigilante since Flag, and a teenager? Who took down 7 mafia members on his debut. Shinso wasn't worried anymore. No, Shinso was curious. So, despite his better judgment, the tired teen turned around to head after the police cars. I really need to get shifts that don't end at 3:40 in the morning. Shinso rounded the corner to find a teenager who looked more 14 than 16 being interviewed by the cops. Name? Oh, I'm Ace. The boy, Ace, nodded to the officer. Sir, you do realize we're about to arrest you on charges of vigilantism, correct? The officer said, deadly serious. He just saved 4 people, for fuck's sake. This is why Shinso didn't agree with the Hero Public Safety Commission. Then Ace laughed. No, you're not. Sir, I didn't use a quirk. Ace said, smirk obvious in his tone. So? The officer asked, raising an eyebrow. Vigilantism is specified as illegal quirk use, sir. Ace replied. The officer simply put down his pad and stared. None of my activities tonight were illegal, sir. Oh, Jesus. The officer rubbed his nose. All right, get this kid to Tsukachi. Kid, we'll need a statement, please. Ace simply nodded and started to follow the detective to the office. That was the vigilante's name? A vigilante that stuck around, actually waited around for the police to show up, argued with an officer, proved his innocence at the crime scene, and was about to give a statement on the event? Shinso had never heard of someone like that before. And the teenager had seemed so chipper, almost bouncing as he corrected the officer. Hey, kid, purple-haired boy. Ace's voice snapped Shinso out of his thought process. What? He almost snarled. He couldn't help it if his instincts kicked in, defense in place. Whoa, I was just going to suggest heading home. I would accompany you, but I have to give a statement. Ace laughed, nodding in the opposite direction. I can do without your help. All right then, Shinso. I don't doubt it. I'll see you around. Ace smiled, or Shinso thought he did, running after Tsukachi once again. What? Shinso thought, turning around to head back to his house. The hell was that? It wasn't until well after the fact did Shinso question how Ace knew his name. What were you thinking? How could you call Shinso by his name like that? That could compromise your identity. God, Izuku was so stupid. Think of Inko. Think of Kaken. Damn. Well, now he had to give a statement about the attack to Tsukachi, damn lie detector quirk. Ah well, shouldn't take too long. He'd just tell the detective the truth and, well, if it happened to involve quirk use, Izuku had had many years of practice when it came to picking his words carefully. He could probably dance around or even avoid questions for hours on end, maybe without Tsukachi ever noticing if it really came down to it. Now, Ace, can you tell me what you were doing in that alleyway at 3 in the morning? The detective asked, raising an eyebrow at the still-masked boy. I had just stopped another bar fight. I was just debuting, you know, and I heard some commotion coming from the alley. Like the model citizen I am, I decided to take a quick look round the block, see if anything was up. Ace responded. The detective nodded, eyes darting back to the piece of paper he held in his hands. All right, were you aware of the hostage situation at the time? Tsukachi asked. Nope, didn't know any kidnappings were planned for tonight. Or is it this morning? Either way, the answer to your question is no. Ace rambled, slightly on edge. Okay then. Name? Legal name? Like hell I'm telling you that? The detective sighed, glancing down to the sheet of paper once again. Okay, let's see. Tsukachi sighed, tracing the words on the paper with his finger. Here we go. After the witnesses were let go, what happened? I was in a right lot of trouble, that's what happened. Izuku grumbled. The detective raised an eyebrow. All right. I got thrown into a wall, sliced with a knife, cornered and punched a bit, and then police arrived. That's it? Izuku thought for a moment. Technically no, other stuff had happened and that would trigger the detective's quirk, which was bad news for Deku. All the important events? He answered, nodding his head. Tsukachi took that as a truth and nodded once again, reading the next question on his sheet of paper. What is your quirk? Ace of cards. What does it do? Same question Hiroshi asked. Man smart, doesn't just leave it at the name of the quirk, no. Izuku would like to know what he could do with a quirk like Tsukachi's, what he could combine. Honestly? Ace asked, raising an eyebrow inside his mask. No fucking clue. The detective sighed, obviously realizing the truth of the sentence, before reading the next question on the list. Did you use your quirk during the fight? Did he use a quirk? Did he use his quirk? No, he didn't. His quirk seemed to be combining and storing quirks, and he didn't combine or store any quirks throughout the battle, meaning he could truthfully answer no to that question. No, sir, I did not. Ace answered, the mirth on his facial features bleeding into his tone of voice. You've been truthful this entire time. All right, re-encount the battle for me, if you could. Tsukachi laughed. God, this kid almost reminded him of Eraserhead. He'd have to mention the vigilante the next time the two spoke. Yes, sir. I had just stopped a bar fight and I was leaving across the rooftops. Nezu skimmed over news reports, waiting for something of any interest to catch his eye. It wasn't until he checked local news of Mutasafa did he find anything of interest. New vigilante claimed Ace, vigilante of hoped friend or foe? A vigilante in Mutasafa? One that took on a hero-formatted name? Its uniqueness was intriguing. The new vigilante in Mutasafa is all the locals will talk about. The first vigilante on record to take up a hero name is sure to cause some stir, but caused even more when it was revealed that he fights quirkless. After rescuing 2 teenage girls from a kidnapping, he instructed them on what to do and kicked some villain butt. The vigilante proclaimed himself Ace, vigilante of hope, as his final line. The final few seconds of the fight, including this incredible one line, was recorded and the video is linked below. Insert video link here. Some, however, have doubts about Ace. Their main points target his age, him being only 16, or so they say, his experience, and the force he used during the battle, knocking 6 of the 7 men unconscious using nothing but a knife and his bare hands, with 4 sustaining many injuries and 1 left with a serious head wound. We at Mutasafa News Point are behind him. Welcome this. A vigilante, who fought quirkless? 16-year-old vigilante who rushed into a kidnapping, a 1vs7 scenario, and formed a plan while back-chatting and came out victorious? It certainly wasn't an easy feat. This vigilante might have some potential. It seems as if UTA might be having some slightly illegal students in it that year. It seems so indeed. 2 months had passed since Izuku had become Ace, and wow, fighting evil hurt. Or maybe that was just the newest burn the greenette was applying cream to. Either way, He wanted to do this as quickly as possible so he could get on call with Shinso as soon as he could. He'd hate to keep his only friend waiting after all. Quickly grabbing his phone, Izuku accepted the call. "Hey, Shinso-san." The boy laughed, flinching as the cream got a little too deep in the wound. "How are you, my friend?" "We aren't friends, Midoriya-san." Shinso deadpanned. Izuku giggled from his side of the phone. They had this argument every night. "You are simply an acquaintance who started talking. You're the one who calls," Izuku taunted in a sing-song kind of voice. "Shut up, green bean. You picked up," the purple-haired middle schooler grumbled. "Besides, weren't we gonna talk about heroes?" You could hear Izuku peeking up at the words hero from across the country. Well, not heroes, just people who seem to fit the description of someone who saves others. The greenette correctly. Shinso laughed softly in the other side of the phone. "My father's would qualify then." "That's great. Eraserhead would qualify in his own crazy way." "That he would. Man's my only role model at this point." Shinso joked. "You're not his son?" Izuku asked, letting a bit of surprise leak into his voice for effect. He got the reaction he wanted as he heard Shinso groan from the other side of the phone. "Midoriya-san. We've been over this. If we aren't friends, why do you refer to me as San?" Izuku asked, eyes glinting dangerously, basically shaking the bait in front of Shinso's face. "Because it's polite." "So you want to be polite to me?" The younger asked, excited. "Oh, Shinson, we are friends." "Midoriya-san." Shinso groaned once again, a hand pressing to his face. "Anyway, back on topic?" Izuku finally smirked, steering the conversation back on track. "Who else would qualify? What about Ace?" Well, if Izuku hadn't froze at that, then Antarctica was 90 Fahrenheit. He managed to stutter out, barely not dropping his phone. "Yeah, the vigilante of hope. I met him once, you know." "You did?" Izuku squeaked. Right, he'd met Shinso at his debut. "Yeah, in his debut. He knew my name, which was weird but whatever. The dude tried to offer me a walk home or something. He's okay in my books." Shinso explained, waiting for his reaction. "Ah, Shinso-san, you like him?" "No, I don't. I said he's okay." "Yeah, but that's like you saying you like and respect him." Izuku protested, laughing at the mental image of his friend's face. "Midoriya-san, stop it." "No." Izuku hummed in response, fumbling with his phone as he finished applying the burn cream. "Ah shoot. Midoriya? Are you alright?" Shinso asked, dropping the honorific to check on his friend. "Just fine, Shinson." Izuku replied, laughing as he picked up his phone. "We'll meet for lunch tomorrow, yeah? You better not be late again, Midoriya-san." Shinso responded easily, a click coming from the other's end as Izuku ended the call. "Yeah, bye." The greenette whispered, putting the phone down. He needed to grab his costume to go out on patrol anyway. Mutasafa would freak if he didn't. He always patrolled on Wednesdays, after all. Smirking, the middle schooler swiftly pulled up the metal guard and hood, slipping into the armored costume as he opened a window to exit out of. Quietly, as not to wake the most likely drunk Inko, the vigilante sprung hands first out the window and into a neatly tucked forward roll, remaining balanced on his feet as he fell onto the roof. Smirking at his success, the boy sprung onto the next rooftop, scanning for any crime. Apparently, he should be watching out for drug rings that night. That's what the police tipped him off about, anyway. He was giving Tsuchaki a real hard time. "Hey, problem child." I race her head. The two often ran into each other as their patrol routes clashed, and Ace was about 80% sure the Eraser was fond of him. Not like Ace would ever tell him his civilian identity, but he knew Eraser was Aizawa, who taught the 1A class in Yuda's hero course, so they might meet anyway. Even if Aizawa wouldn't know it. The vigilante chuckled, remembering their first meeting. Ace had been active for about a month at that point, and honestly, the public was rather fond of their vigilante. The news had eaten him up, reporting on everything he did, every patrol. Hell, he had a newspaper literally dedicated to him. It was absolutely crazy, though the hype was dying down. The general feeling of safety wasn't. That's what Ace was living for. It was a cold Friday night when the pro and the vigilante had met, Izuku had just finished stopping a breaking and entering and was climbing up to his favorite roof spot scaling the abandoned building. He'd gotten some bandages out and was treating a knife wound while he scanned the streets below. If need be, he would jump into action without the proper medical attention, but he'd much rather have a bandaged arm. It made fighting just that much easier, you know? Either way, what he was not expecting was a gruff but curious voice coming from the roof directly in front of him. Got in a bit of trouble then? Ace's head shot up, eyes shining and knife already in his hands. Upon glancing at the man, the knife was lowered. Peach Pro Hero Eraserhead? He gasped. Sorry. Wasn't exactly expecting to see ya tonight. So I can tell, kid? Eraser laughed, eyes glancing down at his arm. Need help? What with this? Nah, simple cut. Bit deeper than I would have liked, mind you, but any cut is a little deeper than I might like. Ace laughed, quickly finishing up his bandages and focusing his attention on the man standing in front of him. It's dangerous out here, you know? Eraser spoke softly. Tell me about it. Izuku groaned, deciding to make a joke out of the situation. All these damn burglars. Eraser's face remained neutral. Your ace, I presume? That's me, the red card of justice. The greenette nodded. He often referred to himself as such, it was like his catchphrase. Damn, he wanted that to be his catchphrase. You sound like a teenager. Eraserhead chuckled. 'Cause I am. Ace retorted, giving a small chuckle of his own. Ah, what are you, 16? Nope, not even 16, voice changer, you see. Can't have my identity compromised, you know. Eraserhead did react in surprise to that, his eyes widening slightly. How old are you then? He asked. 14, in middle school. I plan on the UDA entrance exams, you know. Izuku responded, a twinkle in his eyes. Don't tell the press that, though. Who knows who they'd connect to me? 14. Eraser asked, eyes narrowing. Kid, it's like 2 in the morning. Wow, really? Could have sworn it was 10 when I left. Ace snarked, laughing internally as the pro-hero tried to decide how he felt about the vigilante. Damn it, kid, this is far too dangerous. Aizawa started. Well, can't lecture me if you can't catch me. Ace responded, quickly cartwheeling out of his capture scarf's range and handspringing onto the next rooftop. Fuck, kid. Eraser swore, jumping across the rooftops to chase the vigilante. The two were caught up in a quick chase across the city. Every time the greenette was in range, he slipped out the next moment. Sometimes it looked as if he disappeared into the shadows only to reappear out off them down in the nearest alleyway. Second later, the kid knew what he was doing, damn it. Tsukachi was right, it was no use catching him. They couldn't charge him or anything, nothing he did was illegal, and if they did it would cause an uproar in Mizudafu. Talking of Tsukachi, they were heading to the police station. Blast this child? All right, kid, all right. Eraserhead sighed, stopping on the side of a building. He watched Ace screech to a halt mid-handspring, then turned to face him, not even getting off his hands. Yeah? What do you got for me? He asked, grinning wildly. Fucking hell, kid looked like Nezu. All right, problem child. Here's the deal. I need your help on something, a human trafficking ring. Said you were the best. Mind popping down to Tamaki Street on Sunday? Eraser finally sighed. He was uncomfortable with someone as young as last year's students helping him take down a trafficking ring, but he was supposed to be the best, and if he was into much danger, Eraser could always pull him out. Trafficking, eh? Yeah, sure, I don't see why not. I'll meet you there at say. Yeah, alright. Talk to you later, Eraser. Ace chirped, flying back onto his feet and jumping back down into the alleyways of Mizudafu, disappearing from thin air. Damn it, that problem child was gonna be the death of him, Aizawa could already tell. Snapping out off his thoughts, the vigilante turned to face the pro. Aye, Eraser. He cheered. I've been looking for you, kid. Tsukachi wants us. Eraser said, beckoning the young vigilante. Izuku cocked his head to the side, but got up and followed the hero anyway, curiosity winning the teenager over. Tsukachi? Alright, I suppose. Let's see if he's done his job properly, then Ace laughed, backflipping onto the roof behind him before swerving around and running to the police station, propelling himself off the wall and onto a higher rooftop, watching Aizawa follow him on his left. The two landed directly in front of the police department's door, Aizawa simply striding in and knocking on Tsukachi's office door as Izuku followed close behind. It only took the detective 4 seconds to answer the door, silently welcoming them in. Ace ignored the stares from the other officers. He had only ever been in the interrogation room of the building for statements. It was a very intimidating room, so some of the other officers were seeing him in person for the first time. The door clicked shut behind them. "I Racer it, Ace. There you two are. Come in please," Tsukachi said, letting the two take a seat. "I have to talk to you about something." A file was thrown onto the desk as the detective seated himself, fingers steepling slightly. "This is the folder of one Inko Midoriya." Midoriya? Ace asked, almost in disbelief. "Yes, why? Do you know her?" The detective asked. "Oh yeah. I used to live in her apartment building." Ace admitted. Technically, he did used to live there and he still did now. It would be a truth. The detective nodded, his quirk obviously coming to the same conclusion. "Well, she's being investigated for child abuse." "Inko?" Ace responded in surprise. "Really? She's the last person I would have thought." "I understand, Ace. But yes, we think it's a situation of neglect." "This," Tsukachi continued, putting down another folder, "is the folder of Izuku Midoriya, her 14-year-old son." Fuck. Wow. Eraser spat. "Why did you call us in?" Ace asked. "I mean, we'll take the case, but why us specifically?" "The kid is quirkless." Tsukachi responded truthfully. "I thought you two would relate to him more." "Oh." Ace responded softly. "I see. We'll take the case." Aizawa responded. "Come on, Ace, it's only 10 right now, we'll go talk to Inko." "Yeah. Of course. Ace responded, nodding as he followed Eraserhead out of the detective's office. "Inko, right?" The two traveled to Izuku's apartment in tense silence. Eraser wanted to ask him a question, he could tell. "Oh, out with it already, we're going to deal with abusive mothers, not awkward questions," Ace finally said, turning to face Eraser, who sighed and slowed down to a walk. "In the office, when we were talking about Inko, you were disconcerted." "What was that about?" Aizawa finally asked, turning to look at the vigilante. Izuku gulped. "This could go very, very wrong. I know Inko. We aren't like the closest or anything, but we talk at least once a week. I never guessed, I didn't dash." Eraser simply nodded in return. "It's bad, knowing someone who's expected for child abuse." "I don't yet. But hey, it's your job and my hobby, right?" Ace joked slightly, starting to pick up the pace. Eraser nodded, getting the message. Not now. They were in for a long night. Ace and Eraser knocked on the apartment door, Ace hoping like fuck that Inko was sober for the upcoming conversation. Hell, he hoped she was awake. "Who is it?" Inko shouted, and Izuku almost flinched. A quiet "goddammit" was heard and the door opened up about a minute later. "Vigilante Ace? Hello, are you Inko Midoriya?" Aizawa asked. "Yeah, that's me, Inko Midoriya." "Why?" the woman asked, narrowing her eyes at the pair. "I am pro-hero Eraserhead. Ace and I are here on behalf of Mizudafu Police Department on suspicions of child neglect," Eraserhead explained, gently oushing the woman aside. "Can you explain to us why that may be?" Inko spluttered, eyes darting between the vigilante and pro as the two entered her living room. "Me? Child neglect?" "Yes, we understand your child, Izuku Midoriya, is quirkless. Is that correct?" Aizawa asked. "Yes." Inko grumbled, shaking her head as the two watched her. "Has the joint and everything?" "Miss Midoriya, when was the last time you checked on your son?" Ace asked, hoping Inko wouldn't recognize his voice. "Checked in? What do you mean by that?" Inko asked, confused. "I mean, when was the last time you asked about how he felt?" "In reality, it was about 2 months ago." Inko stuttered, looking around. "I'll go get Izuku out to answer some questions, shall I dash?" "She can't do that. You should have refused the case. You're so stupid, Izuku." "Oh, that won't be necessary. You wouldn't want to interrupt his sleep, would you?" he simply asked, thinking fast. Inko blanked, eyes darting around wildly. Course not. I dash. When was the last time you made him dinner, or bought him a new school uniform? Aizawa asked, raising an eyebrow. Well a dash. Miss Midoriya, with all due respect, you don't seem like the most responsible parent. Eraser growled. We'll be sending CPS over to collect Izuku in the morning while we further the investigation. Eraser stood up and headed for the door. Ace rushed to stand up and follow Eraser out the door. Your voice sounds familiar. Inko murmured, eyes narrowing at Ace. I don't know why you'd think that, Miss Midoriya. Ace responded, internally panicking. I would take what Eraser had said to heart. Aren't you supposed to be the red card of justice? How is this justice? Inko fumed. She looked like she was about to lunge at Izuku, and that didn't settle well with Aizawa. Not when it was his problem child it looked like she was about to lunge at. He quickly swept Ace out of the door, sending one of his quirk-affected gazes at Inko, gritting his teeth as he also followed the teenager out of the door. Looking furious, Aizawa closed the door behind him as he let his quirk down, starting down the hallway. Ace, who had been still recovering from the surprised stumble backwards, quickly headed after him. Why had Eraser acted the way he did? Maybe it was just instinct. Inko had looked pretty villainous. Still, why had he pushed Izuku out of the way? Besides, he had given Inko one of his quirk-infused glares that were specifically reserved for threatening situations, like the drug ring boss they had taken down 2 weeks ago. Why had he used it on Inko? It didn't make sense. She looked she was going to lunge at him, sure, but then why did Eraser? Whoa, Eraser, she's a bitch, sure, but did she really deserve one of those glares? Ace joked, basically hopping after the pro. She looked like she was going to attack you. Aizawa responded, completely serious. Ace blinked, drawing a blank. So? God, this fucking kid. Kid's problem child, Jesus Christ. We'll talk about this on the rooftop. Eraser said, jumping onto a fire escape and grabbing onto the metal frame. Izuku cocked his head to the side, shaking his head in confusion before following the man up, scaling the ladder up to the top of the roof. The air was generally nippy, but it wasn't very cold, slightly uncomfortable, Ace would say. Something about Aizawa's actions just confused him. Why had he shoved Ace out of the way? Okay? What did you want to talk about? Ace asked, almost laughing just to fit his persona. Kid, she looked like she was going to attack you. Aizawa said. Ace blinked. But why would that matter? Yes, so? Ace asked, giving a confused smile. Problem child, I swear to God who taught you self-preservation is, I didn't want you to get hurt. Eraserhead said, rubbing his nose. Aizawa. Didn't... What? Ace finally spluttered out, confusion obvious in his voice. Okay, problem child, I need to ask you something serious. Eraserhead said, making sure Ace was looking at him. Okay? Ace agreed in confusion. Do you have a place to go? Outside of vigilantism, somewhere safe. Eraser asked, searching the boy's eyes, or what he could see of the boy's eyes, for something, anything that could help him know. Do I? Ace trailed off, thinking for a minute. He raised his head. Yeah. I do. He had Shinso. When Izuku woke up the next morning, Inko was already gone. He was met by 2 CPS agents who explained the situation. Hey there, you're Izuku Midoriya, correct? One of them asked. I'm Scarlet, and this is Matt. Hello, I am indeed Izuku Midoriya. It is wonderful to meet you, Scarlet-chan. Izuku greeted with a slight bow. They'd already come for Inko then. Well, aren't you polite? We've come here because of Scarlet started. A child neglect investigation, I am aware. Izuku cut her off. He didn't need a rundown of what he already knew. Scarlet looked surprised at this. I overheard the conversation last night. My apologies, Midoriya-kun. I shall tell Shota-kun to be quieter next time. Scarlet smiled. We're homing you in an orphanage for now. You can continue your normal education though. Scarlet motioned for the boy to follow her as she moved towards the door. It's quite all right, Scarlet-san. Thank you. Izuku nodded, following the woman out of the door, Matt close behind. Of course. Until your mother is charged, we cannot officially rehome you. You may need to testify. Matt informed him. Izuku's stomach churned at the thought of testifying, but he nodded anyway. Of course, I understand. Izuku nodded. I presume I will not be going to school today? Not today, but you will be back by next week? Matt answered, opening a car door for Izuku. I did not think so. Thank you, I just thought I should check. Izuku smiled, seating himself in the car. Of course. And then the car started, and Izuku spiraled. Oh fuck. How did they find out? I thought I'd hidden all the evidence. How is this possible? What will Kaken think? God, how am I going to continue vigilantism in an orphanage? At least I bought my suit with me. Inko isn't even that negligent. I was fine. I should have never done whatever I have done. Besides, I deserved it. Probably not the best of thoughts, but they were definitely Izuku's thoughts. Seriously, how was he going to do vigilantism? How was he to be ace? Did he deserve to be ace? What did Eraserhead mean when he said he cared about him? God, Izuku couldn't wrap his head around it. Everything was so overwhelming and oh fuck a cold new breath what was going on how could it always? So Izuku-kun, what do you think? Scarlet's words snapped Izuku out of his panic, gaze shifting to the orphanage as the car stopped. Wow, it's pretty big. Izuku stuttered, following Matt out of the car and into the orphanage. Yeah, it used to be a small church, but then it got sold off to the HPSC and donated it to CPS, and here we are. Matt explained. Izuku nodded, and followed the duo further into the building. As it turned out, vigilantism wasn't a problem. The orphanage hated Izuku for his quirkless status. The minute CPS had left, Izuku had been dragged to the attic and practically shoved in there. He caught the all-too-familiar words, quirkless and useless, as the employee, someone named Sarbi, left him in there, informing him she would come for him in the morning. Just what you deserve. The voice spat at him. God, even the orphanage doesn't want you. If Eraserhead knew the truth, then he'd dump you too, just like Inko, just like Kaken. Couldn't even go to school, you're so weak. God, why did it have to speak up now of all times? Quickly checking the clock on his phone, Izuku sighed. It had only been 2 hours since he'd woken up. How had that been? He opened the text app, sliding into Shinso's profile. Hey great boy, I can't make it to lunch today. Rape. Why not? Rape. I spent good money on this soba. _greenest_bean. I'm in an orphanage, Inko's being investigated for child neglect. Rape. Shit sorry. Grape. She guilty? _greenest_bean. Yeah. _greenest_bean. Also the orphanage fucking hates me LMAO. Rape. Izuku, that's not funny. Grape. Izuku, are you okay? _greenest_bean. Yeah, sorry. Just trying to lighten the mood. T. Sure. Fuck, did he just say Inko was guilty? He needed to get his head right. It was nighttime and, true to her word, Sarbi was indeed coming to get him only in the morning. His door remained locked. But whatever, he'd gone without dinner before. Besides, that's just more vigilantism, right? Even better. Sighing, Izuku donned his voice changer, hood, mask, and costume before clambering out the window and scaling the church's walls, landing neatly on the roof. God, being ace felt good. Izuku woke up to the hard, wooden floor on his back. Usually, that wouldn't be a problem for the boy. He was used to the rough texture. He'd fallen asleep on patrol enough times to know the feeling of concrete in the early morning. Besides, it wasn't like his bed in the orphanage was much better. No, the problem was that Izuku was on a hard wooden floor and he couldn't breathe. He felt something wet on his left arm. It was numb, just like the rest of his body was. Had he gotten knocked out on patrol? No, that couldn't be it. The light came from the same window he had in his room. Then what had happened? What was running down his arm? Why was everything so out of focus and fuzzy? What? He yelped and shot up as pain shot through his body, instinctively clutching his arm. What? That was what had been running down his arm. What had happened? Where was he bleeding from? God damn it, Izuku, you have to focus. This could be a serious wound. His eyes searched his arm for any kind of damage. The blood wasn't any higher than his elbow, and the pain mostly subsided right below there. Nothing on the underside of his arm, so nothing had gone through it, so it was unlikely he was in shock. His vision was out of focus and blurry, the blurriness most likely caused by either tears or a subsequent head wound. The dizziness was probably also a factor of a head wound or of lack of hydration, though blood loss could also be a cause. If the cause was blood loss, the fatigue and the out-of-focusness could also be justified as well as the lack of breath, meaning that was the most likely scenario. He would of course need to check for concussions, but he could leave that for later. Without being able to identify the exact positioning or severity of the wound, general treatment became a whole lot harder. It would be nice if he'd known where the damage had come from, but that could be put aside for now. He knew where he kept bandages and other medical supplies like painkillers and hydrogen peroxide, which was commonly used to disinfect injuries. He had to move fast. Signs showed that the initial stage of circulatory shock would commence in under 5 minutes if the blood loss was not stopped. Crawling over to his sleeping place, keeping his weight mainly on his right arm and his legs, Izuku fell down once again, using his right arm to fish out the backpack full of medical supplies. Quickly unzipping the thing, he pulled out a cloth and started to apply pressure to the wound as he fished around for the bandages. Quickly pulling the roll out, the greenette was glad he kept it so easily accessible. He wasn't so glad that his hands shook so badly or that his coordination sucked and could go to hell along with his vision. He estimated he had about 3.5 minutes before he went into initial shock, meaning he had a short amount of time to stop the considerable amount of bleeding. Exchanging the cloth for the gauze, Izuku applied more pressure as he watched the blood seep through the bandages. Shit, he muttered, cutting off another piece of gauze to add to the wound. Shit. He threw the messily folded cloth on top of the 2 bandages, continuing his previous actions. At least the blood wasn't bleeding through the cloth. Not that he could tell, anyway. His vision was still blurry and unfocused, but he could still tell colors apart from each other, and red on white was quite the difference. Crossing one of his legs over the towel to keep the pressure steady, he used his available limb to grab the hydrogen peroxide and put it to one side. If there was anything in the wound, that would hopefully help getting it out. Currently, he needed the disinfection wipes in his bag. If he just used hydrogen peroxide when the wound was open, it could be potentially dangerous. Pulling out the wipes, he set them off to the side as he removed both his leg and the cloth to check on the wound. The bleeding was calming down, but it was still bleeding. Reapplying the cloth, the middle schooler laid back to work on his breathing. He hadn't even realized he was hyperventilating until that moment, and it wouldn't help him in the situation he had gotten himself into. How had he even gotten himself in this situation? It had been late at night when Izuku had returned home. Almost 4 in the morning, actually, a Saturday. Patrol had been particularly lax that evening. He honestly should have known he wouldn't get off so easily, but he'd been lenient in his mood all the less. He'd already taken off his costume outside as he usually did before slipping in the attic, slipping quickly into bed. He ended up being very glad he had taken his costume off before entering the building as he was met by the orphanage owner, Madame Sesame. Apparently one of the other kids had homework due that day and had wanted Izuku to do it, but by the time they had come up to give it to him, he was already on the rooftops with Eraserhead. So they decided the best course of action was to wait until he got back and then beat him bloody. Izuku was already exhausted and damaged from patrol, so he didn't instinctively fight back. He pretty much understood what was happening when he was slammed against the wall though, bracing himself as he was then immediately pulled up off the wall and thrown onto the stiff and grubby mattress that rested on the floor. Madam was shouting up a storm now. The greenette was surprised it wasn't waking anybody. He caught the words disgrace and problem and useless, as well as something about losing the damn cash out. That confirmed his theory, they were getting money for keeping him there. It made sense. Why would they keep him for any other reason? It was like keeping deadweight around, and why wouldn't you get paid for that? In state of static, Izuku didn't see or register the knife until it had already cut against his arm, squeaking out as he threw it as far away as possible. Who had the knife? Was it Sesame-san? Perhaps was it one he'd had lying around? Glancing down, the greenette felt dizzy as he stumbled back. He needed to stop the blood. He heard some faint panicked shouting as he slid down, back against the wall and holding his other, severely more damaged arm like a cast. The bleeding, he needed to stop the bleeding. He heard some stampering footsteps and then he heard the door slam behind someone, most likely Madame Sesame, as he continued to fight for consciousness. If he blacked out now, there was a good chance he would go into circulatory shock before he even woke up again. Of course, staying conscious was easier said than done, breathing was getting harder and harder. In one final effort to get to his backpack and stop the bleeding, Izuku rolled over and off the wall, landing in the middle of the floor. He just had to get a little farther. The world around him blacked out and then he fell. Shinso Hitoshi was not one to lose his wits. He'd survived the bullying from his peers since he was 4. Some hated him for it and shunned him, while others shouted HS questions back and shoved him, and occasionally they'd gang up to taunt him like they did when Midoriya had found him. But that was all it had ever been, all it ever reached to / he got a black eye once, and his dad and papa had gone to the principal and shouted up a storm, threatening lawsuits and threats alike. That had put any and all physical tormentation out of the picture, though it accelerated the verbal abuse. No one ever got physical again, and Shinso was more than glad about that. It was this whole situation that led him to meet Green Bean. Never anything like this. When Izuku hadn't shown up to their early morning meeting call, Shinso had been worried. When Izuku didn't pick up the phone, Shinso had panicked. When he went to the orphanage, Izuku stayed in and found the Green Bean wounded and stitching up his own arm. Shinso froze. Hit Haita sure. Izuku stuttered out, eyes darting between the purple-haired boy and his arm. I wasn't expecting yo. Fuck Green Bean. Hitoshi mumbled out, darting forwards to gently take the boy's arm. What the fuck, what the actual shit? Izuku groaned, wringing his good hand as he fumbled for an excuse. Itr tripped? Tripped, fell down 3 flights of stairs, banged your head on all the walls, and then sliced your arm open on the stair rail? Hitoshi snapped, gaze immediately softening as Izuku flinched. I'm not mad at you, Green Bean. What happened? Really, what happened here? He watched, eyes desperate, as Izuku squirmed. Shinso needed the truth so he could go beat up whoever had hurt the Green Bean and then again to press charges. I can't tell yo. Izuku mumbled, tears pricking at his eyes as he turned away from Hitoshi. Green Bean dashed. Hitoshi, please. Shinso froze, hands still hovering over the injured's arm. Had whoever done this to him hurt Izuku that much? Had they done damage deeper than physically? What was Izuku really doing with a suicide note in his bag? Was Izuku being threatened? Zuku? Shinso asked, hesitating. The smaller looked up at him. Was this dash? He took a shaky breath in. Someone at school? The greenette froze, eyes boring into the purple-haired insomniac. What? No. Not all dash. Not all. Shinso asked, eyes full of worry. No, I don't, please dash. Okay, don't press him. Shinso could wait for answers. Okay, it's okay, you're safe. I'm right here. Hitoshi comforted, pulling the shorter into a quick hug. Was the wound self-inflicted? Now that the thought crossed Shinso's mind, he couldn't get it out. What if Midoriya had become overwhelmed? He knew it happened easily. He used to have a harm problem himself, but he was lucky enough to have 2 dads help him through it. Izuku didn't. What if Izuku was suffering from depression or anxiety and Shinso didn't know? Was there something that Midoriya was doing that was potentially life-threatening? Anything else? He saw the starburst stars trailing down his back, as well and the knife-looking scars on his arms and legs. He saw the greenette's vulnerability as he cried on Shinso's shoulder. He saw the hurt and the blood that seemed obvious now that the signs were right there. He saw everything that made the boy perfect. He saw Izuku fall. Eraserhead was worried when Ace showed up late to patrol. Ace, though seemingly careless and lighthearted, was always punctual. He showed up half an hour late. Hey Eraser. His voice seemed almost unsteady as he used his right arm to grapple onto the building's side and flip himself over the top to meet the pro-hero. You're late. Eraser grumbled, eyes quickly averting to the skyline. Why yeah, I know. Ace murmured, eyes darting to the floor. That was very different. Eraser raised an eyebrow at the vigilante. Kid? You feeling okay? The pro chuckled lightly, hoping to ease the kid into talking to him. Yeah, just fine. School's been a bitch though. Be quiet, Ace. Stop talking, Ace. Stop aggravating the guy you're not aggravating and he'll go away, Ace. It's all utter nonsense if you ask me. Ugh, I bet Yudata will be so much better than this. The vigilante groaned, flopping his head back. Now that caught Aizawa's attention. Will be so much better? He was trying out for Yudata? His kid was trying out for Yudata? Not his kid, Shoyuta reminded himself. Just some vigilante you picked up. School sucks, huh, problem child? Aizawa instead asked, though it was more like a statement than a question. Yup. Ace agreed, popping his pea. I only have 1 month left though. Goodbye middle school. Right, only 14. God, Ace was only 14. Hear that? Ace asked, peeking up. Aizawa quickly looked in the general direction. Multiple rooftops and fire escapes. Sounds like a challenge. Under his scarf, Aizawa grinned. Good luck, problem child. He didn't mention how Ace stumbled across the 6th rooftop. He didn't mention how he only used his right arm when grappling and climbing. He didn't mention how Ace fell 2 feet off a wall. He didn't mention how it felt. He didn't mention watching Ace crumble. Everyone hated him. First it was Kaken, and everyone knew Kaken had an anger problem. He was only 4 and boys will be boys. It was just what happened when you were quirkless, he supposed. Kaken was angry and Deku was weak. That was just how that worked. Kaken was the hero and Deku was the civilian, and heroes didn't need help from civilians, certainly not quirkless civilians like Izuku. Next it was the other students. They treated him like you would a cat, except for one major difference. People liked cats. They treated him like a jealousy-infused, noisy attention-seeking asshole. They were all civilians, doctors, police officers, government workers, important people, and he was the scum in the back alleyways. Civilians didn't need to be worried by scum, certainly not quirkless scum like Izuku. Then it was the teachers. They treated him like a nuisance, dirt beneath their shoes, like he was deserving of all the justice that came his way. They treated him like he was a trouble-causing, good-for-nothing, low-life annoyance, a bump in their shiny new careers. A problem. Teachers were always right after all. Teachers didn't need to be corrected by problems, certainly not quirkless problems like Izuku. When his mother started hating him, she hit and she bit and she shouted up a storm, telling him the words of others as he was thrown to the ground and beat for crying, beat for being weak. She treated him like a problem she couldn't get rid of, like a bothersome ant problem. Inko was important, she was a nurse. Nurses were always right. Nurses didn't need to be questioned by irremovable problems, certainly not quirkless irremovable problems like Izuku. And finally it was him. He treated himself like he wasn't a person, like he was a greedy, undeserving, self-centered bastard whose only purpose in life was to cause others pain and misery. Like his existence itself was an insult to society. He didn't deserve to eat, he didn't deserve to sleep. Why are you just sitting there when there are so many others in worse situations? And the voices didn't need to be argued with. Certainly not by quirkless villains like Izuku. Laying on the ground, breathless, for just a second. Less than a second even. Izuku had slipped up when climbing a wall, falling backwards and hitting the ground, right in front of Eraserhead. That less than a second felt like an eternity in Izuku's head. Could you be any more worthless? How could you think you deserve to be prancing around like this if you're going to continue to slip up? How can you ever be a hero if you can't do even a simple race like this with your right arm? How can anybody even stand you? Shinso didn't believe you when you said you needed to get some rest. No, he just wanted to get out of there. You can't even keep your balance when on a wall and you expect to get into the top hero school in Japan? You call yourself a vigilante? How could you ever compare? All Might was right, he was right, he was right, he was right, he was right. And then he was Ace again, giving out a large, comedical OOF. As he landed, getting up to laugh and scale the wall again. Except he didn't start to scale the wall again. Instead, he took the fire escape up. How could he ever compare to Eraserhead? How could he ever even dream of holding a candle to the figure that was the man with the scarf? The underground hero had probably saved more people than he'd even seen, let alone saved. How could he ever hold himself as an equal to the man rushing in front of him? To any of the heroes? He couldn't. Not ever. Then why are you trying? I don't know. Izuku whispered to himself, almost in tears. I really don't know. What was that, problem child? Aizawa taunted. You finally giving up? He could pretend. Aizawa, he could pretend. What, no way. Just wait until I race across that finish line. Ace snarked, jumping across a rooftop gap to catch up with Eraser. Nearly losing his balance, nearly falling, nearly ending it all. Wait until you eat those words, problem child. Wait until I eat the for you. What? Shut up, it's late. He could pretend. For Shinso, he could pretend. For Eraserhead, he could pretend. But pretending is used for make-believe, and Izuku wasn't pretending at all. Izuku counted the days until the U.A entrance exam, but dreaded counting the days till U.A itself. Mainly because All Might would be teaching there. He'd hacked into U.A's system, because OFC he did, to see if he could get any info on the exam itself. He was very disappointed, and had come across All Might's profile in the teacher information folder. Because of course, they'd take the crusher of all of Izuku's dreams and the reason for his suicide attempt and make him his teacher. Or his hopefully soon-to-be teacher. Because of course they had to go and do that. How can you be so selfish? They've gotten the literal #1 hero to train the others. How could you ever complain about that? You're being so petty. Do you know the amount of work they put into the lessons at U.A? The amount of time it takes to plan a curriculum? You can't just ask them to throw that all out of the window because of your own selfish desires. How could you ever call yourself a hero? Biting his lip, Izuku quickly exited out of the U.A system, making sure to leave a back door, of course, and limped back to his bed, whimpering as he fell back onto his bad arm. He wanted to cry, to get help. Heroes didn't need help, he reminded himself. Heroes never need help. And I need to be a hero. And you need to be a hero. One step at a time. That was how Izuku did things. One step at a time. And now he did the infamous 2 steps forwards and 1 step back trick. U.A, the most prestigious hero school in Japan, had its entrance exam that day. 1 step forwards. Izuku was going to be taking it. Another step forwards. Aizawa was teaching 1A homeroom. 1 big step back if you asked Izuku. But Hito was taking it too, and you can't let down Hito. Slinging his backpack over his shoulder, the greenette continued towards the towering building, watching as the other contestants entered the building. How did the guy with the crab arms think he could win the entrance exam? Izuku couldn't help but ask the others, since he knew what the exam was going to be. It was sort of like cheating, but then again, U.A students were always encouraged to think outside the box, right? He had simply used his materials. Continuing down the path, the middle schooler tried to keep a clear head and not focus on the burned scar freshly imprinted upon his arm. It wouldn't help him to dwell on the past, even if it was the recent past. He took note of how the other contestants were practicing quirk use, which reminded the Midoriya that he needed to pick a quirk to use or pretend he had a dual quirk. He noticed that his shoelaces were untied just a minute too late, however, and he ended up tripping and falling over. God damn it, Izuku. You can't even walk right, and you're critiquing others? You cheated anyway, you should be disqualified immediately. The greenette braced for an impact that never came. He opened his eyes to the ground, but a couple feet away. Oh, sorry. I should have asked before I used my quirk on you. A girl apologized, lifting Izuku up before letting him go. Ah? It's okay, problem really? Izuku smiled at the girl. Thanks. No problem. You're trying out for the hero course, right? Izuku nodded, hair bopping up and down with his head. I hope to see you in class then. My name's Ochako Uraraka. The girl waved, quickly running off. Izuku Midoriya? The teenager shouted after her, smiling and waving back. Right, he needed to get to the entrance exam. Once again picking himself up, he used Shadow Walker to speed up his travel. If he wanted to get to the testing arena in time, he'd need to pick up the pace. He could go over twice as fast using Shadow Walker, which was useful. He passed other students, feeling slightly nauseous as he did so. He still wasn't used to all the slipping about he did. Spotting a certain tuft of hair, Izuku smirked dangerously. Darting out of the shadows, he landed next to Hitoshi. Hitoshi! Hi! The greenette smiled, essentially popping into existence. Hitoshi jumped slightly before sighing. Midoriya-san. Hiai. What happened to Izuku? The shorter asked, playfully whining at Hitoshi. The man stared him dead in the eye. Okay then dash. Did you testify? Izuku blinked at him. Testify? Against who? The greenette smiled instantly wavered as he realized what Hitoshi meant. No. Inko hadn't been wrong in her actions and they hadn't called him up to court yet, though they had set a court date and Izuku was required to be there. After all, he was supposedly the abused one in this situation. He didn't really want to face Inko, his supposed abuser. It would be far too awkward. Besides, if he said anything wrong, she could be thrown in jail, and Izuku didn't want that. She was a nurse. The hospital was understaffed as it was. Alright, tell me if you need support? Hitoshi monotoned. He could tell Izuku did not wish to speak of the situation, so he wouldn't press. The latter was more than grateful for this. He wasn't sure he really wanted Hitoshi to step in, though. Hitoshi might get caught up in Izuku's mess, and then the voices would get louder, and that wasn't the best experience. Besides, who wanted to be caught up with Izuku? He could somewhat understand Ace, but Izuku? The duo continued their conversation in silent side glances and nods of reassurance. Maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to be as worried as he was. Looking around at the contestants, Izuku identified both the girl who saved him from making an utter embarrassment out of himself and Ingenium's younger brother. Izuku had no doubt the two of them would pass. He would like to talk to the girl who saved him, but she was preparing already. He wouldn't want to be a bother, and it seemed he believed that the younger Tenya was on the lookout for bothers and annoyances. He wouldn't be surprised if he just came up to him and shouted at him right now. Besides, Ida was just trying to protect and help the other soon-to-be hero students, like a hero. Not like Izuku. Auriite. Who here's ready to go? Present Mike screamed, and Izuku internally fanboyed. Present Mike had such a cool quirk. It had only been a few minutes and Izuku was already ready to go, so he nodded respectfully up at the screen before he turned his attention to the doors. The minute those doors are open, get ready to go. Izuku took that to heart, no surprise there, and get into his running position, opening his quirk menu. Which two should he choose? He had no time to pick, as soon as the doors opened Izuku shot into the arena, a while ahead of everybody else. The others stood confused for a minute before responding to the doors and running in after him. The greenette was already far ahead though, running across the rooftops like he owned them, taking down a one-pointer with a simple bash kick to the control panel, smirking as he bounce-grappled onto a windowsill so he could scale the wall. Quickly refocusing on his quirk panel as he continued to bounce around the arena, taking out another one-pointer and a two-pointer. Quirks, combined. Spirit of telekinesis. Description. The user may teleport themselves and any objects or beings in a 50-foot radius anywhere else in said radius. Tropes. If used too often, user will become overly exhausted. 7 tellers. Description. This allows the user to find out the sins of others and affect the user with the sins they have committed. Tropes. If used when user is not properly maintained, tired, hungry, sad, etc., the user will be minorly affected by the sins they read. Quirks, stand alone. Quirk. Glacier movements. Description. User can create glaciers of ice that shoot around, melting behind them as they spread. Tropes. Currently unknown. Quirk. Description. User's speed, strength, and agility are increased. Tropes. How much a user's statistics are increased are based on their mood and health. Quirk. Shadowwalk. Description. User melts into shadows, moving twice as fast as usual. If no shadows are present, user will turn into a shadow. Tropes. When used too often, user will be unable to turn the quirk off for 2 to 8 hours. Izuku would definitely use SOT. It had been his basis quirk ever since he used it to stop himself from committing suicide help himself, and he admitted he was attached. 7 tellers was an intriguing quirk, a cross between 7 sins and, somehow, selling teller. which was Satsume's quirk. He believed he could copy others' quirk if he knew how they worked and their names, and that his quirk had manifested when he was 4, copying the quirks around him and storing them away. He'd only realized it when he had jumped off a roof bin in a dangerous situation and his quirk had reacted. Glacier movements would be hard to explain since his father's quirk was breathing fire. He still couldn't figure out how he'd gotten his own quirk, so he couldn't well use that. Even if it was a repressed gene, his father's fire quirk genes would have cancelled any ice or water quirk genes out. It was genetically impossible unless he was adopted. He was not. Shadowwalker was a good choice, but it was much more a spy quirk. He couldn't manipulate shadows or anything, just slip into them. He could use it in secret like he did when he was Ace, which was probably the best option for that quirk. Fistful was another quirk he had unconsciously copied off some villain he was fighting. The thing about it was that with its drawback, it was somewhat unpredictable. But his grandfather on his father's side had a strength amplifier quirk, though not as strong, so it wouldn't be that bad considering genetics. Meaning his safest options were Fistful and Spirit of Telekinesis. Teleporting over to a 3-pointer, Izuku slammed into the robot, fritzing its panel out before he slammed into it once more. Izuku liked Fistful. Twisting around, he saw Shinso dealing with the civilians and the more sentient villains. The U.A entrance exam. Shinso commands a raider into beating itself unconscious and then he controllers a group of civilians forwards into the safety zone. Izuku continues to pummel the bots into the ground, stamping on them as they spit out sparks. Then the 0-pointer comes through, and Shinso runs. The exam is designed as so. The main villains are the 1, 2, and 3-pointers. They wreak havoc on the city, and defeating them earns you points. You need these points to pass the exam. While the civilians, actors, are in panic. They aren't listening to the heroes and said heroes needs to get them deposited into the safety zone. 1 point for each saved. Then there are the raiders. They run around and attack civilians as well as steal from shops. There are 1-pointers and 3-pointers when it comes to raiders. The 0-pointer is the same as it was last year. It's a huge-ass robot. Aizawa stares intently at the screen, as does everybody else in the surveillance room. It's their job to watch the students after all. But Aizawa isn't watching the students. No, Aizawa's watching a student. Singular. What? The student in question is called Izuku Midoriya. He knew the other teachers caught interest in him the minute he teleported on top of that robot. A teleportation quirk was very useful. They'd paid even more attention to the boy when they saw his strength-amplifying quirk. A dual quirk, he had too. But that wasn't when Aizawa had eyes on him, no. It was because of how he ran forwards first. The boy had rushed through the gate the minute he could slip through it and immediately took to the rooftops like he made them. He'd ran around and taken down 2 robots without using his quirk, quite in a style his kid Ace would often do, though Izuku did later use his dual quirks in the fight. He still had that same kind of bash him round the head and then annoy Tsukachi style, even if the backtalk was non-existent. I want him. Aizawa didn't even notice he'd been speaking until he'd already said it. Nezu raised an eyebrow at the teacher. Izuku Midoriya. In my class. He clarified. Might as well go through with it now that he's already voiced it out loud. Taking a liking to our selection already? Eraser? My. The dog? Hamster? Smirked evilly at the man. He has potential. And he might be problem child. The dual quirk? The 1B homeroom teacher, Vlad King, laughed. Of course, that was what Vlad would be interested in. The fighting style, Aizawa corrected, continuing to watch as the kid threw a remark to his friend. 2 Class 1A Hero Corps students right off the bat. What an interesting year. The exam is designed as so. The main villains are the 1, 2, and 3-pointers. They wreak havoc on the city, and defeating them earns you points. You need these points to pass the exam. While the civilians, actors, are in panic. They aren't listening to the heroes and said heroes needs to get them deposited into the safety zone. 1 point for each saved. Then there are the raiders. They run around and attack civilians as well as steal from shops. There are 1-pointers and 3-pointers when it comes to raiders. The 0-pointer is the same. Nezu watched Izuku very closely. He'd watched as the boy rushed in first, took to the roofs, and quirklessly take out 4 robots, in the span of maybe a minute. But that wasn't the only thing that Nezu noticed, no. It was how the boy seemed to plan everything. Nezu knew that look, because he had it almost all the time. The boy took every detail into account and formulated a plan to the best of his capability. Nezu also had a hunch that there was more to this boy quirk-wise than he seemed to let on. While taking out a 2-pointer and a 1-pointer, the boy seemed to be barely concentrating on the fight, instead scanning something in front of his eyes, like he was reading. Nezu guessed it had something to do with the teleportation, well, the telekinesis quirk he had, some kind of intelligence or information quirk, perhaps. The boy also surprised Nezu with his quirkless fighting style, one of the reasons he'd been interested in Ace. He noticed many similarities between the two boys, and quickly had multiple theories. And then Eraserhead decided he liked the green-haired boy too, no doubt also seeing the similarities between Midoriya and Ace. It was well known by the faculty of UA that Aizawa was fond of the vigilante, spending most all his patrol time with him. No doubt if Ace ever needed it he'd swoop in and adopt the poor unsuspecting teen. Nezu also noted that in his folder, Izuku Midoriya was stated as quirkless, which meant he was either a late bloomer or he had lied. Nezu guessed, considering the fact that it was a dual quirk, those take time to show, it was the former instead of the latter, seeming as the boy had less control over his strength amplifier quirk. This year had much potential. Izuku Midoriya and his friend Shinso Hitoshi proved this. Maybe it was time to take on a student. Besides, if the green-haired boy did happen to have an intelligence quirk, well, mentor like mentee, or something along those lines. The 0-pointer towered over most of the city, just as Izuku suspected. It had the same dynamics as the files said, being 75 feet tall and about 15 or 20 feet long. Though a little more intimidating than shown in the picture, Izuku did know its weakness. Its control panel was installed in its back shoulder area, and Izuku was really good at bashing open control panels. Or just bashing them in general. The greenette had a plan, though, and he discussed it with Hitoshi. He was surprised the purplet hadn't questioned how he knew this, and they both agreed to it, making a few tweaks. When the 0-pointer hit, Izuku ran off to scale the robot, sought to get as high as possible until he started to get tired. Then he'd try to climb the rest of the way. Fistful would make that part of the plan easier. It was Hitoshi's job to gather up all the citizens with as many questions/answers as possible, sending them all towards the safe zone and evacuating all the other raiders and stray people still running around for when the bot fell. He'd warn his fellow comrades to stay at least 50 feet away from the bot at all times. That was going according to plan, Hitoshi running around and collecting as many people as he could control at once-7, and making sure they got to the safe zone before releasing, then diving back in for more. There was also a police zone, which was another way to defeat raiders, which is where he landed the raiders in evacuation. Most of the other soon-to-be hero students took the news well, except for an explosive blonde boy. Hitoshi could tell Izuku didn't like him, and the green bean liked everyone. Which meant that Explosives probably wasn't the best person. Izuku's part was thrown a little off the rails when the girl, Ochako Uraraka, tripped and got stuck under some rubble. The girl had saved him from tripping, and that would have hurt and possibly embarrassing him. Besides, Uraraka had a good heart and the greenette didn't want her to fail. A new plan was already forming in Izuku's head, and if Uraraka's quirk worked the way Izuku thought it did, then just about everything became a whole lot easier in the process. Turning his sights on Ochako, Izuku picked up the pace and turned on Fistful. Springing up by her side, he grabbed her to pull her off to the sidelines, before realizing quickly that the rubble would crush her. Letting her down slowly, Izuku turned to the rubble, realizing that there was a metal pole that her foot held up, which was supporting the rock that would crush her. How irritating! Grappling the pole with his right arm, the left still being the weaker, muscle damage was AB***. He used his foot to put space in between the rock and Ochako. As he pulled out the pole, he kicked away the rock and heaved Uraraka out of the blast zone in a smooth sweep and release movement. Finally pulling her out of the way, he looked down at the girl. Thanks, Izuku-kun. She smiled, getting up. It seemed she wasn't damaged too badly. No problem. Hey, I have a plan to take down the 0-pointer, but I'm going to need your help. Izuku explained. MIH help? But why? Why do we even want to take down the zero-pointer? Uraraka asked, coughing. It's causing too much destruction. Look at all the buildings it's trampled already. How will we evacuate citizens with that clunking around? Izuku asked, raising an eyebrow. That's true. Ochako nodded in understanding. Alright, what do you need me to do? Izuku grinned his Cheshire grin, the one he sent Eraserhead when he couldn't tell. I sure as hell hope you have good reflexes. The plan was madness, absolute insanity, a danger to his life. But when was anything ever not? Uraraka looked nervous, eyes darting up at Izuku who was floating maybe a foot in the air. You sure about this? She asked, concerned. Nah, but when am I ever? Izuku answered honestly. Now come on before I go up there myself. The green net was thrown into the air and floated right onto the zero-pointer's shoulder. Izuku panicked for a second. He always let himself panic for just a second before he got to work. What if it all went wrong, and they said Uraraka was responsible for his death? Or worse, that he was responsible for Uraraka's? What happened if the robot malfunctioned, or the panel was more reinforced than said in the file? What would happen if when the robot was destroyed, it crushed someone or something? What would happen if someone got injured, gravely injured, and it was Izuku's fault? What if they decided he was too reckless, and he was rejected from U today? Okay, panic time over. Do time now. Quickly grappling onto a dent in the metal robot's shoulder, Izuku draped himself over the shoulder, legs dangling of the edge. His eyes searched the robot's upper back. If he let go and fell, he'd most likely die, but he wasn't there to do that, not today. He found what his eyes were searching for, a green hatch/panel with a little handhold thing. Perfect, he had just what he needed to continue the plan like usual. Swinging with fistful activated, Izuku swung and teleported, starting to feel small fatigue. Damn, if he used it anymore he'd lose control of fistful. He'd just have to stick it out for now without TOS. He grappled the small handhold on the panel and flipped himself over so he was facing the panel, legs on the zero-pointer's neck. He used fistful to bend the panel down as he sprung up, flipping over and smashing into the wiring, making sure to destroy the processor. The robot fitseed and Izuku flipped off the panel and onto the now falling shoulder. In the corner of his eye, he could see a distraught Ochako. So he jumped off, falling to meet her, basically using as much guidance as he could in the fall to get him to the discussed point where Uraraka was on top of a crumbled robot. And just where they discussed, Uraraka was there waiting. She saw Izuku and grabbed at his wrist, floating him maybe 2 feet off the ground. Poor girl looked like she'd never been under more stress and, in her defense, she probably never had. The timer went off just a second or two after that. Sorry I got you caught up into that. Izuku apologized as he was let go and Uraraka hurled. What is your quirk anyway? I know it has something to do with floating or telekinesis. Don't worry about it. My quirk's called zero gravity. I can make anything weigh nothing. She explained, smiling at the greenette. That's a really cool quirk. Have you ever tried to make anything weigh more? Because you seem to be able to control my movements. After RG had checked them over and made sure they were okay, Izuku and Uraraka split up to find Hito. Hitoshi. There you dash, the teenager failed on his words, rounding the corner to find Hitoshi and Endeavor's son? Izuku, there you are, you dumbass. You scared me. Hitoshi sighed in relief. This is Shoto, he wanted to meet you. Hey, I'm Izuku Midoriya. The greenette stuttered out, smiling nervously. Shoto Todoroki. Shoto answered somewhat coldly, giving the boy a once-over. You're the one with the dual quirk. Izuku gulped. Yeah, that's me. He nodded. Me too. That wasn't the reaction Izuku was expecting. I'm sure you know my father, but can we just not dash? Shoto started. Yeah, he's a bitch. Izuku interrupted, watching the chronomatic boy as he blinked. What? The hot and cold asked in somewhat confusion. He's a bitch. Why, your father, Ain? The younger answered. Have you seen his casualty count? If he didn't have his license he might as well be a villain. As the Shoto fucking smiled. I think we're going to get along, Midoriya. I hope we're in the same class. And then he was gone. What? Shinso asked, breathing in. The fuck? Izuku shrugged helplessly, shaking his head. Whatever, come on. Shinso grumbled, smiling down at the boy. Okay, can we get boba? Yeah, sure kid. Hey, we're both kids. One letter was the thing that gave Izuku Midoriya hope. It was a normal day at the orphanage. He was doing kids' homework while hiding the new burn scars and waiting for his rejection letter. Even if the logical part of his brain screamed that he'd gotten accepted, he'd never listened to his logical half much. Besides, what did logic know? It was late at night when the letter arrived, and of course, they made the middle schooler pick up the mail. He stowed his letter away and handed them the rest of the mail before going up to his room and opening the letter from High School. All he saw was a disc, and at first he was confused. He then realized it was a hologram message disc and put it down on the table. He watched an image of All Mights, which he both cringed and flinched at, pop out of the disc, and started spouting nonsense. Congratulations, young Midoriya. You've been accepted into U.A with 60 villain points and 130 rescue points, with an astounding 190 points in general, scoring first place in the entrance exam. God, this man is going to make an absolutely awful teacher. Then Izuku blinked. And he did so again. For several minutes. Wait, I've been accepted? He muttered, still processing the information. And I came first? You can find your schedule, student ID, and uniform website in the letter below. You're in Class 1A and you start next week. The holographic All Might repeated. Plus Ultra. The hologram fizzed out, leaving Izuku in almost darkness for the third time. This time, however, he took the batteries out and shoved them away for his voice changer later. Of course, WhatIf. That was Aizawa's class. He had been put in Aizawa's class, which meant the chances of him graduating with his secret identity still, well, a secret, went from hopeful to I hope I make it out alive at all. Eraserhead knew his fighting style, the side of his personality that really only Hitoshi and Eraserhead himself knew, and God, Izuku was going to screw himself over, wasn't he? Glancing down at the envelope, he saw an inconspicuous website address as well as a pin for it, meaning they most likely changed the website each year, probably with a new passcode/pin each time. It made it much harder for someone to just buy an ID or uniform and slip in unnoticed, though the Greenette had no doubt that they didn't do customized IDs, only making them for the accepted or re-administered students. Man, I can't believe Dash, the soon-to-be hero student laughed out, hands shaking as he entered into the website and typed in the password. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya, to your first term at UA. Though the site brought some worrying news, uniforms were over 7,500 yen, each. Izuku was practically jumping for joy. He was going to U.A. in first place. He had to text Hitoshi. The greenest bean. Gray pikum firsten thigza mommy god hitoshido ya know wow big this is? The purplest grape. Once again for the insomniacs. The greenest grape I came first in the exam, oh my god Hitoshi, do you know how big this is? The purplest grape. You did? Yeah. Purplest IZUKU. Greenest HITOSHI. Thunderstorpus. Well done, green bean. Thanks, what about you? Thunderstorpus. Class 1A. He. Thunderstorpus. This is going to be the best school year ever. I know. And in sync, the entire staff of you, exempt Nezu, felt a chill going down their spine. Damn faulty teacher instinct, Aizawa muttered. Bouncing up and down, a certain vigilante ran across the rooftops to meet his mentor. Eraser, Ace called out, flipping over a chimney as he went. Gymnastics since you were 13 paid of, apparently. Ah, problem child. The underground hero acknowledged, sending the boy a nod. You're ready? Even if he wished he could patrol the streets, Eraser had made him an offer. A good one. Yeah. I've been waiting for this all week, you know? The Greenette smirked, cartwheeling slightly to stand on his hands. I'm not sick, so I can totally go on this field trip. Ace laughed as the man rolled his eyes. He could tell the man was smiling underneath his capture scarf. The vigilante had gotten good at telling when his mentor was smiling. Finally, Ace was going to see the man's agency. He'd joked about it often in the earlier days, but had been, well, joking more like wishful thinking, but he didn't have to mention that. However, just last week, Eraser had asked if he'd actually like to see the agency. He had, of course, jumped aboard that train. Hell, even back before All Might crushed his dreams, he would have killed to see Eraser's agency. The man was like his second idol, and now he took the full spot. And the man apparently cared about him, which had been a nice little surprise, especially considering the little vigilante/hero thing they had going on. As the duo rushed across the rooftops, the hero student-to-be couldn't help but notice the class planner in Eraser's pocket. Most likely 1A's class planner. Honestly, Ace's unexpected foresight, you get it? Night eye on the situation was almost cheating. What most definitely was cheating was the way he sneakily grabbed the planner and reading up about the USJ field trip before quickly putting it back. No need for Eraser to ever know. The two quickly arrived at the agency, which was right by the outskirts of Murasafa. It was surprisingly flashy for an underground hero agency, but Ace supposed it was to fit in. There were some other hero agencies around as well, including one of the only agencies that specialize strictly on sidekicks and minor hero doing. The vigilante nearly stopped his father figure mentor to go check it out. He didn't, though, and the duo kept on running. They entered through the door. It took Aizawa 7 minutes to convince the vigilante that the window was an awful option of the agency, quickly steering towards reception where Eraser had shown his hero license, dared anyone to stop them with his eyes, and waltzed them through 2 layers of security, a press team, and straight into an hero-filled room with beanbags and a table. Eraser, have you brought him? Someone asked. Ace watched in fascination as the young woman darted out from the shadows. She had raven wings and had obviously encased herself in her wings, making her almost invisible in the darkness. Yes, Deku, this is the problem, vigilante. Aizawa nodded as Ace grinned. What? It's problem vigilante now? I thought I was problem child. Ace complained, smirking at the heroes under his mask. Damn it, Ace, you know what? Okay, you can be problem child. Yeah. The soon-to-be hero student shouted, bouncing lightly. Hello there, Ace. The hero Deku greeted. I'm Tori Tokoyami, but you can just call me Tori. Oh, your quirk is called Raven, right? The vigilante asked. That is so cool. Do you have the same diet as a raven? Is your IQ or any kind of senses affected by your quirk? Are your wings just like a raven's, or are they better suited for their size? Have you ever thought of putting anything on your wings as a defensive strategy, or would that disable your flight? Are you able to fly up to 58.7 miles per hour, or faster? The underground hero stared at the masked boy in surprise and slight awe, eyes wide as she contemplated what had just happened, before laughing rather loudly. You were right, Tracer, I like him. I told you would. Ace looked between the two of them. Wah. Eraser watched as his kids stumbled through questions, greetings, and just casual small talk in a matter of minutes. You've really gone soft for that one, huh? The pro whipped around to face Inkasukapu, scowling at the man. I don't know what you mean, Takuya. Eraser hissed. Look at him. He's known you for what, 7 months? 8 months? He knows practically everything about you. Takuya shook his head. I've known you for 5 years and I didn't even know you were married until last Wednesday. The black-haired hero shook his head lightly. We're similar. Takuya laughed, turning his head to look at the chatty vigilante making conversation with Inazuma Cookin in the corner. You too? Similar? Kid talks people's ears off and looks like he could barely hold his own. Takuya smiled weakly. Well, I suppose you have that last part in common. Once again, Eraser shook his head. He doesn't fight with a quirk. He's just different. An obvious insomniac, but we're working on that. Aizawa explained. Just adopt him then. Inkasukapu said it like it was the easiest thing to understand. Just adopt the kid who you know nothing about. Eraser didn't even know his name, and the kid probably had parents looking after him. The vigilante wasn't even breaking any laws, but the police were still after him. Not to arrest him, maybe, but he'd still warned Ace to be careful around them. Wouldn't want them staining his squeaky clean record. Adopt him? Eraserhead chuckled. I don't even know his name. Of course I'm going to adopt him. Izuku was practically bouncing with excitement. His first day at Udare. The boy was especially excited about both his talk with Nezu and with meeting Uraraka-chan again. Besides, he'd finally be going to school with Hitoshi. They'd both been put in the same class. Class 1A. Izuku wouldn't know what to do if Hitoshi had been in 1B. Complain, probably. The boy scanned his phone, almost gulping at what it showed. Izuku couldn't piece enough money together to afford even one uniform, and had to take out a loan for the other 2,800 yen needed. Just another looming deadline, as apparently 3 others weren't enough for the poor boy. Swiping out of the tab, the greenette decided to go over his schedule for the next few hours. Arrive at U.A 5:25 a.m. Talk with Nezu 5:30 a.m. Finish talk with Nezu 6:30 a.m. Arrive to class early 6:35 a.m. to 6:40 a.m. Hope 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Yep, seemed about right. Checking the time, Izuku saw it was exactly 5:25 a.m., meaning he was right on schedule. Entering the building, he saw what seemed to be press forming outside the doors. The news about All Might teaching spread fast, apparently. For once, the greenette was glad he'd come into school early. He'd hate to be caught up in the press like he was sure his fellow classmates would be. He should probably warn Hitoshi. But then again, it was already 5:26, and honestly, Izuku liked to watch the boy suffer. Quietly shutting the doors behind him, the green-haired boy started to walk through his maze of hallways. He'd memorized the layout of the school, but knowing the layout and knowing his way around were two very different things. Lucky, he made it to the office with minimal trouble at exactly 5:30. Peach Principal Nezu? UW wish to speak to me? The greenette prompted, poking his head through the door. Ah, Midoriya. Right on time. Come, do sit down. Nezu nodded, gesturing to one of the empty seats. I'd like to talk to you about some things on your record. So it was about the quirkless thing. It's about my cute quirkless status, yes? Izuku asked, looking at the principal as he took a seat. Exactly. I have a few theories, but I wish for you to confirm one of them. The Chimera Stoat hybrid smiled, showing his somewhat scary teeth. Izuku's vigilante persona told him he needed to get out of that office as soon as possible. I have 2 Q quirks, as you've witnessed. IW was an extremely late bloomer. In fact, my quirk Mani manifested barely 10 months ago, and I simply haven't had teach time to update my status. I was 10 wine years behind my peers, you know. The hero student explained, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought so. I'm guessing it's one of the reasons you use quirkless fighting techniques? The principal asked, locating a paw under his chin. Izuku nodded enthusiastically, eyes practically shining. He couldn't help it, he was always excited to talk about fighting styles. It's one of the original reasons he got into analysis, so he could analyze other heroes' fighting styles and use those in his own training. He'd never admit it, but Eraser had totally inspired his signature of binding up villains in some material so it was easier to land hits on them but harder for them to land hits on him. I cannot help but notice that under interests and hobbies, you put both analysis and hacking. Nezu continued, flipping through what the teenager could only think was his folder. Care to abbreviate? Nodding hesitantly, the boy thought how he could explain. They were rather irregular hobbies. Well, my hacking is just a skill I picked up. I thought it would be useful to KN know how to seach code. Maybe then IW wouldn't be in the N95%, right? It's teach started as a little white hat thing. He helping people into locked accounts, hacking into business websites to find their weaknesses for the owner. But then I Seach continued to do it and I was eventually indulging into things like Seach corrupt agencies and Ida decided to stop doing J jobs. He explained. His hacking analysis wasn't well known, he went by red card and that was it. Nezu nodded at him, prompting him to continue. For an analysis, well, I've been into that since I was small. Teach started doing it when I was about D3 or F4. Not anything in-depth, not at first. I was just looking at some of the heroes' fighting styles. Looking at what their quirk, etc. Then I started to go to fights in person, and I started analyzing the villains' quirks too. I kept notebooks of my analysis. My classmates, heroes, villains, it was just a thing I did. Izuku shrugged, mentally cringing at his stutter. Interesting. Do you happen to have any of these notebooks on your person? Nezu asked. Izuku nodded, quickly reaching down to his backpack, easily unzipping the yellow carrier. He always kept 2 on him, 1 for heroes and 1 for classmates. This is my hero notep book? The teenager explained, handing the book to Nezu's outstretched paw. The principal flipped through the pages for a few minutes, smirking dangerously as he continued through the anxious teenager's notebook. Finally, the white-furred chimera/stoat looked up. Midoriya, have you ever taken an IQ test? The minute Nezu had noticed the boy in the entrance exam, he'd been interested. The quirkless fighting style along with the dual quirk and quick wits, he could tell the green-haired child had captured about everyone else's attention as well. He wasn't all that surprised when Aizawa had requested the teenager. The possibility that he might be the man's proclaimed problem child was enough, not to mention the potential the boy held even without the resemblance. He took as soon as the door is open literally. In a real fight, there were no countdowns. What had impressed Nezu was that the child had known when he could fit through the doors. He must have been calculating while the doors were opening. When his file had said hacking, Nezu couldn't help but think back to the recent security breach. Someone had gotten into the UDATA systems and looked at teacher information, entrance exam plans, and security plans. That took some impressive skill, and the Chimera Stoat had wanted to give the person responsible a scholarship and a letter of acceptance, especially after the perpetrator couldn't be found even by Nezu himself. Now, it seemed he might not have to worry about that. Midoriya had been different than Nezu had expected. The boy spoke with a stutter and seemed nervous, unlike the quick-thinking and sharp-tongued ace, also unlike what they had seen at the exam. He had been quick to speak with Uraraka and sure in his motives. This intrigued the principal even more, however. 2 personalities seemed to come out of the boy, and after he'd revealed he'd been quirkless most his life, Nezu had a few ideas why. Either way, when he saw the boy's notebook, he'd been filled with malicious glee. Page after page of writing. The kid had it all. The notebook consisted of everything from how Endeavor could use his quirk to actually save people to how Midnight could redesign her costume for maximum quirk potential. Midoriya had a knack for analysis, and his ideas were detailed and better than most professionals. Nezu was glad he'd grabbed the boy before the Hero Public Safety Commission had. Who knows what the child could do as his personal student? He'd make Aizawa's year hell. Nezu had no doubt about that fact. How the HPSC hadn't taken Midoriya already had become clear the moment the child had uttered the word quirkless. His teachers had probably never even tried to give him a proper education, and the child probably had some mental problems from both school and home. He could tell that Midoriya was a bright student, so Nezu only had one more thing to do. Midoriya, have you ever taken an IQ test? An IQ test? And no sir, I can't say I have. Izuku admitted honestly. Why would the principal of U.A ask him that? Did he think he wasn't smart enough for U.A? Well, we're about to change that. Take this. Nezu smiled again, rummaging around his desk. Maybe Izuku should start listening to his vigilante side. It wasn't long before a test was produced, most likely an IQ test. Taking the pages, Izuku hummed lightly as he grabbed a pencil from his pocket. The questions were somewhat easy, though they did vary in difficulty. Some were math questions, some history. Some were simply his opinions as certain matters and others were what he thought was correct according to law, then what was correct according to his ideals/morals. After what must have been at least an hour, Izuku put down his paper and handed the packet to Nezu, tucking his pencil into his backpack along with the notebook. He didn't much like how the Chimera Stoat smiled at him as he did so. Midoriya-san, you are aware that it has taken you 25 minutes to complete this 200-question test? Nezu asked as he got out a pen from the same drawer he produced the IQ test from. How he knew where everything was completely beyond Izuku. I did? The greenette remarked in surprise. The principal simply nodded in a somewhat twisted delight. It was silent for another 4 minutes as Nezu went through the file, grin just broadening as he went. Izuku was starting to like it here. Finally, the principal put down the test. You're aware that the highest IQ ever recorded is 250? And that my own is 245? Nezu asked. Why yes, sir. I in fact know that. The teenager answered, nodded hesitantly. And you realize you have an IQ of 231? Wait, what? I don't what? The hero student almost slurred out, eyes showing his immense confusion. I would like to take you on as my personal student, if that's all right with you. Nezu asked, though it was more of a cackle. Blinking, still slightly dazed, Izuku simply nodded. Why yes, that would be nice, thank you. The greenette stumbled over his words. Brilliant. I'll excuse you from modern art with midnight, then. I'll expect you down in my office when that starts. Nezu smiled. Izuku really needed to listen to his vigilante side more. And so, after Nezu gave him his new schedule, the greenette exited that office faster than you could say ace. Izuku waltzed into his classroom at 6:45 a.m., with a solid 15 minutes until class started. He was the first one to class, naturally, but 5 minutes later both Shoto Todoroki and Ingenium's little brother, Ida tense if he was correct, walked through the door. Oh, Midoriya-kun. How are you? I did not expect you to be here so early. Hi Shoto. I had a meeting with the principal. He smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. You are Izuku Midoriya, correct? You came first in the entrance exam. Your courage is admirable. The Tenya brother said, somewhat loudly. Against Izuku's best will he flinched. Thank you, Aida-kun. The greenette thanked, trying to play off his reaction. I am sorry if I scared you. How do you know my name? Ida apologized, curious. Oh, I saw your name on the board. You're Inuzumi's brother, Siege correct? Izuku asked. Ida exclaimed, looking startled. How did you know? Sorry, I'm somewhat of a hero fanatic. I did some research on your brother a while ago. The teenager admitted, averting his eyes. Well, please do not tell anyone. I do not wish to be treated differently because of my brother. The loud brunette asked. The other nodded in understanding. Of course, Ida-kun. And so the trio sat down and waited. Izuku almost groaned as Aizawa made his entrance, quickly realizing why Eraser's agency said that he had a soft spot for the boy. Come on, we're missing the seminar. You have 10 minutes to get changed and meet me outside. The man grunted, yellow sleeping bag discarded to the side and log forgotten by the class. The greenette quickly scrambled out the door, leaving the rest of 1A in confusion. If he wanted to get on Aizawa's good side as a citizen, then he'd need to do things Ace's way. Quickly and efficiently. He was in the changing room faster than even Ida, grabbing his training suit from the locker and dashing into one of the bathroom stalls. He was heading out of the changing room as others started changing, but not before he closed the door for the ladies, who'd forgotten to do so. He got an embarrassed thank you from Uraraka for that. He was the first one out on the field, Shoto second and Ida first. They were the only ones on time. Class, you're all late by at least 5 minutes. The only exceptions are Tenya, Todoroki, and Midoriya. Aizawa scowled. I'll have that down to 3 minutes by the end of the year. Izuku didn't miss the glance that the black-haired man stole at him. The rest of 1A made a noise of some apology, some grumbles. Either way, Eraser wasn't lying. Izuku knew at least that much from working as ace. Well, that and the fact that statements took time, and the sooner he was an authorized hero the better. You've been taking standardized tests most of your lives. But you've never got to use your quirks in physical exams before. The country's still trying to pretend we're all created equal by not letting those with the most power excel. Aizawa paused, looking around at his students. It's not rational. One day, the Ministry of Education will learn. His eyes landed on the greenette protagonist. Izuku, you managed to get the most points in the entrance exam. How far could you throw a softball in junior high? 55 meters, sensei. Eraser grunted. Here, take this. Use your quirks this time. Izuku almost hesitated, but he took the ball and stepped into the circle. As long as you don't step out of the circle, you can do whatever you want. Go on, don't waste our time. Quickly, the teenager's mind snapped into action. He could teleport anything in a 50-foot or a 15-meter radius to anywhere in a 50-meter radius. Spirit of telekinesis was out of the question, then. With Fistful activated, in the current state he was in, he could probably throw it more than 200 meters. So, he activated Fistful and threw 268 meters. Aizawa showed the number to the class. Wow. Good job, Midoriya. Nice throw. Izuku muttered. This looks so fun. Uraraka squealed. Izuku's blood pressure dropped. Oh, Uraraka, no. What demon had she unleashed on this poor, unsuspecting class now? He threw an anxious glance at Shinso, who returned it full force. You think this is fun? Aizawa glowered. It's fine. The greenette told himself. Nezu wouldn't let him expel me. Probably. You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all gonna be games and play time? The class audible gulped, Ida looking around unsure. Idiots. Today you'll compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last has none, and will be immediately expelled. That was the kicker the youngest knew. Was coming and just nodded. Shinso raised an eyebrow at the boy, but didn't question him. The class immediately burst out into complaints. But Mr. Aizawa, we just got here. You can't expel us on the first day. That's unfair. Uraraka blurted out. Well, now Izuku was a little mad too. Aizawa opened his mouth slightly to reprimand the girl, but the greenette got there first. You'd think life is fair? The class faced the boy, a couple looked shocked. Life isn't fair, and villains aren't fair. You think a villain just isn't going to kill you because it's your first day on the job? And no, Aizawa has a point with this test. Then Izuku turned to face the class. Besides, he expelled the entire 1A Class L last year. What's today this year won't be the same. If you can't survive school, then what's to say you'll survive as a hero? That would have been a lot better if he didn't stutter so damn much. Aizawa simply smirked at him. Right, he was supposed to be Midoriya, not Ace. Thank you, Midoriya. Now, these are the tests you shall be competing in. The first test, the running track, wasn't so hard for Izuku. Though paired with Shoto, whose ice was no doubt one of the fastest way to get around, Izuku had basic teleportation. And the track was exactly 50 meters long, meaning he could get across in one big step, basically. Poor Shoto. The bad thing for Shoto was he had no idea Izuku had a dual quirk too, meaning he thought Izuku would try to outrun him. Shoto was wrong, of course, but he didn't know that. One of the drawbacks about getting in on recommendations, the greenette supposed. You didn't know your classmates' quirks. The teenager did wish he could copy Shoto's quirk, though. Ice and fire was a strong combination. Maybe he'd manage to get Shoto to tell him the details, then he could practice with it in private, maybe even combine it with another quirk. Shoto and Izuku lined up, the latter tense and keen as he listened for Eraserhead Aizawa's signal. And go! Shoto started up, but Izuku was already across the finish line. 0.01 seconds? 3.01 seconds? What the hell? Shoto asked, raising an eyebrow at Izuku. Alright. Sorry, Todoroki-kun, you're not the only one with a dual quirk. The greenette winked. Wow, Midoriya-kun. Less than a second. What are your quirks even called? Uraraka asked, cocking her head to the side. One is called Spirit of Telekinesis, and the other I've named Fistful. Izuku smiled, sending an apologetic look to Shoto, who nodded before walking off. He'd need to talk to the boy about his quirk at some point. The only other challenge that Izuku had trouble with was the fourth one, if you counted the running tracks as the first, the weightlifting competition. The boy was already somewhat tired from the other tests, so Fistful wasn't going to be at its max. There was no way the greenette would come first in that round, and he'd come to terms with that fact. His quirks did have limits, no matter how much he didn't want them to. In the end he lifted barely 220 pounds, while the top weight was 540 kilograms, 220 pounds was nothing. That was 749 pounds, over double what Izuku had gotten. His original amount was 180 pounds, so it wasn't even like he'd lifted that much more with his quirk. God, how can you think you're worth being here? The voice didn't help his hero training either. And that was a problem. Unluckily for Izuku, it was a problem he couldn't solve alone. But alone as the only was he was willing to solve it, so fate supposed it had to do something about that. He took notes how Hitoshi used his quirk to get Katsuki to pick up the weights for him while he picked up weights. He watched as Aizawa smirked and counted it. All right, Midoriya, your turn to redo to soft dash. Sorry to cut you off, sir, B, but I'd like to keep my originalist score. The greenette interrupted. He flinched lightly when a scowl passed over Eraser's face. And why is that? The tired man asked, staring down at soon-to-be problem child too. You see, my strength enhancement quirk, fistful, if you will, works based on how I'm feeling and if my needs are met. The more tired, hungry, sad, etc. I am, the more unstable my quirk is. The hero student explained, remembering the time he'd used it to open a jar of jam at 2 in the morning on patrol. The top had taken out a window. Aizawa sighed. Very well, Midoriya. You will keep your original score of 268 meters. Bakugo, get up here. Izuku nodded and stepped off to the side. Well, let Kaken have the glory. When scores were revealed, the teenager was pleasantly surprised with his first place. And he got malicious excitement at Katsuki's second place. In last place is Toru Hagakure. Aizawa finished. However, the class looked up in confusion. No one will be expelled today. Yells came out of the class, a mix of confusion and anger. Izuku raised an eyebrow at his father teacher. I believe you all have potential and it wouldn't be to anyone's benefit if I expelled Hagakure. She has potential that I am unwilling to let go. The black-haired teacher explained tiredly. Makes sense. The greenette mumbled, realizing he said what he thought out loud as Aizawa prompted him to continue. I understand why you believe Hagakure-san has potential, as sensei. Her quirk A and drive are B, both admirable. He flinched lightly when some people clapped. He did not like loud, sudden noises. They reminded him of middle school and Katsuki villains and the orphanage fighting. He was lucky Hitoshi noticed and called out a question that would no doubt turn into a full class discussion. You okay? The boy asked, sitting next to his friend. Yeah, I'm fine. Just, loud. Izuku reassured his friend, smiling weakly at the boy. Hitoshi gave him an unsure look, but nodded all the same. He'd ask the greenette about it later, anyway. The teenager didn't talk to him about school much, so he had his suspicions. We'll eat lunch together, yeah? The purple-haired friend asked. Yeah. I was thinking of inviting Shoto. I know he's not the most social, so I think you'll get along. Izuku teased. Hey, I'm plenty social. You refused to say we were friends about 5 months into our friendship? Hey, you just started talking. 5 months. The class was packing up to go to lunch, and Aizawa had left already. The only two left in the classroom at that point were the dynamic duo, Hitoshi and Izuku. Anyway, so this guy says I can't be a hero without a quirk, the nerve, and now I'm at the school he teaches. I'm not sure whether to weep or to laugh at his ugly-ass face. Shinso nodded, going to pick up Izuku's backpack. The latter did not notice the former freeze. And that's why Eraser is like, totally my favorite hero dash. Izuku, Hitoshi said in a dangerously blank tone. Hitoshi? What is it? Are you dash? Izuku froze in place, turning around to find Hitoshi with his fucking ace mask. Izuku. Explain. No. The greenette raised his head to meet the purplette's eyes. Oops. Hitoshi all but hissed. You have the most infamous vigilante in Mizudafu's history's mask in your bag, and all you can say is oops? I was, cosplaying? Izuku more asked than said. Hitoshi pulled out his voice changer and mouthguard. Okay, so maybe I's not actually cosplay dash. Izuku laughed loudly, eyes darting around for an escape of some sort. Or for a camera. Damn it, Yurare had cameras. Izuku fucking Midoriya dash, the purplet starting, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You know what? Let's talk about this outside. But I said I'd sit with Dash, the hero student started, quickly cutting himself off with a single glare from Hitoshi. I can reschedule. His friend confirmed this with a nod, and Izuku went to reschedule his lunch with Shoto. Damn it, he'd been looking forward to that. But no, he didn't tuck his mask into his backpack properly, and now he was stuck explaining to Hitoshi why it was a good idea to put his life in mortal danger continue to help people. The whole thing was stupid, in the Greenette's eyes. He could get Hito being upset about being left in the dark, but it seemed to be more than that. Okay, let's get this all over with. Shinso started. You're the vigilante ace. Izuku nodded. And, you're known for your confident persona, your smart-ass backtalk, being 16 and having blue eyes, but instead you're a self-destructive, nervous, most doormat person I know green-eyed 14-year-old? The purplet asked, raising an eyebrow at the younger in front of him, who was squirming under his gaze. The latter wanted to protest that he was not self-destructive, nor was he a doormat. Don't even try to protest the self-destructive part. The elder hissed. And so Izuku didn't. Because Hitoshi looked really scary, not unlike Aizawa when he was taking down that trafficking ring not too long ago. Was it possible the duo was related? The tired demeanor and hair were both similar, and they both had psychic quirks. Cousin? Nephew? Was there any way they could be siblings? Eraser had mentioned a couple of siblings, and the purplet hit all description targets. Was it possible that... No, Izuku, I am not related to Eraserhead. Shinso snorted, sounding somewhat amused at Midoriya's unconscious rambling. You sure you aren't? What dash, the Greenette stuttered out, looking at his friend in shock and confusion. Where the hell did you get that from? Oh, it's a huge theory regarding your almost instantaneous partnership, he explained in a bored tone. I found it on one of your forums and joined a discussion, and I'm convinced. We're not people think we're related? The hero student gasped out, confusion more the boy's emotion than anything else. Yeah, you're telling me you're not? I know. We are not related. Izuku insisted, honestly confused on why people would think that of him and Aizawa. He doesn't even know my identity. Shinso's eyes widened at that. He doesn't? I always assumed that you two knew dashed, Hitoshi stumbled, slightly shocked. You should tell him. Oh, absolutely not. Technically I hit first last week so they could get me for assault dash, the youngest started. Or are you just scared that he won't like you as a civilian? Hitoshi asked, cutting his friend off. What? I'm not afraid of, am I? Izuku asked, more to himself, somehow blending into the bench they were sitting on even more, if that was even possible. Yes, now tell me about your daddy issues, it's already 10 minutes into lunch you dumbass. Shinso grumbled. He is not my father. Just a partner for patrols, that's all. Sure Izuku, sure. I swear. Hitoshi. Sighing, the green bean started to head out of the classroom. He had classes with Nezu instead of Midnight's history/modern art/history/thing. Did anyone actually know what she taught? He was starting to doubt even Nezu did, and if he did, Izuku was only what she was supposed to be doing instead of what she was actually going to be teaching them. Once again, Izuku found himself very, very glad that Nezu was tutoring him. Midoriya. Where are you going? Aizawa called out from the floor. Class hasn't started yet. Sorry, Nezu told me to give you this if why you asked. Izuku answered, pulling a letter of some sorts out of his backpack. I don't know what's into the letter, don't ask me. That got the black-haired pro concerned. Why would Nezu give Izuku a letter? Why would he need to go out of class? Did he intend on missing Midnight's class of something or other? Taking the letter from the Greenette, Aizawa opened it up and felt like throwing himself into the nearest active volcano. Dear Aizawa-san. Yes, 'tis I, Rat Satan. I am writing to inform you that I have taken your attendee Izuku Midoriya on as my personal student. My classes will be replacing the usual class time slot after lunch until further notice. Any protest to this decision will be met with Izuku being moved to 1B because I know Vlad is a pushover. He has beat me in chess and I like him. Please report any incidents regarding the student to me immediately. If you do not adopt him soon I will do it first. We will be taking down the Hero Public Safety Commission. Have a nice next 24 hours. Guy who writes your paychecks. The teacher groaned, eyes darting from Izuku to the letter. Damn it, problem child. Alright, go on then. Be back English, no later, he said, handing the boy the letter back, finally allowing the greenette to go to Nezu's office. Better not be too influenced by the rat. But Izuku was already heading down to Nezu's office, and Aizawa had no doubt he was in for quite the year. He was still no closer to knowing if there were 2 problem children or 1 problem child. The pro was rather regretting letting Nezu and the child ever meet. It was a bad idea to even have them in the same building by the looks of it. Wait, Izuku beat him in chess? Bouncing through the halls, the greenette quietly slipped around the corner and past the teacher's lounge. 2 rights and then it was the first door on the left. It shouldn't be a hassle to get there, seeming as he hadn't run into anyone so far. Wait, young Midoriya? Talk about jinxing things. Spinning around on his heels, Izuku turned to face the Motherfew All Might. Izuku turned to face All Might. What is it? The boy asked, cocking his head to the side. What could the man possibly want with him now? You are meant to be in class. The man shouted, looking confused as the younger rolled his eyes. I'm going to class, All Might. I have a lesson with Nezu. Please excuse yourself. The fluffy-haired boy answered coldly, continuing through the hallway as he clutched his backpack in his right palm. Listen, being quirkless in the hero course is extremely dangerous. The man started, running after the boy. And I'm not quirkless anymore, I was just a late bloomer, and I still disagree with you. I took down the 0-pointer with a quirk that wasn't even my own, and my original plan didn't even include Uraraka. I just thought it'd save time, and the less time it takes the less people hurt. He explained, tone still ice cold. It was like a mean Todoroki voice, and All Might swore that even Nezu would be scared of it. I see. But you can't just rely on other people's quirks. Ace does it? There was a silence in the hallway. Izuku was walking slowly now. He'd have to apologize to Nezu. For being late, might as well lure All Might in there to explain, to. The blonde inquired, obviously curious. Muzutafu's local vigilante. He fights entirely quirkless and has been doing so for almost a year. It's the only reason he hasn't been arrested by now. He's a hero. The youngest snapped, speeding up slightly. He's a vigilante. You can't seriously be . I can and I will. In fact, I'm going to be just like him. The greenette sneered before putting on a steady, small smile and knocking on Nezu's door. Ah, Izuku. You're . 3 minutes late, I know. Had a run-in with this guy. The boy shook his head, stepping aside. All Might? May I ask why you are disturbing my personal student from his classes? The hybrid rat thing. Izuku had multiple theories, asked, placing a paw under his chin as he put down the teapot. I didn't know that he was I'll just be going now. I think that's a good idea. Izuku smirked, raising an eyebrow at the symbol of peace as he stood in the doorway for another second before bolting and shutting the door behind him. Today was a good day. The greenette once again spun around. Let's do the lesson then, shall we? Though Nezu was known for disliking humans, an exception was made for his personal students, and he found Izuku to be no exception. Though the child seemed to be nervous, and had little confidence in himself as well as had a rather bad stutter, he could become confident in seconds if the situation needed him to. The Chimera Stoat had no doubt that 1A would explode if they saw the usually timid boy in his confident demeanor. Not to mention that he was the first of Nezu's students in a while to beat him at chess first time, one of the first to have actual professional hacking experience, and he was the first one who was interested in analysis. They'd have to do question-answer chess soon. It was one of Nezu's favorite activities, and something told the genius that Izuku would also appreciate the game. So watching him come down 3 minutes late, with an honestly terrifying facial expression and tone of voice, with All Might in tow, Nezu knew something was up. The stutter was gone, so the Chimera Stoat knew that Izuku must either be close with him or despise the man. The latter seemed the most convincing for the situation. But why would someone so obsessed with heroes be so against the number one? The principal decided he wanted to find out. Did you end up giving Aizawa the note? Nezu asked, gesturing for Midoriya to sit down as he did. The boy nodded as he sat down, taking the poisoned tea the hybrid offered, but not drinking it. I did. He did not seem to appreciate it, however. The green-haired student chuckled, eyes sparkling gently. But I'm here now. Indeed. I wish to talk about your rather impressive quirkless fighting. I understand why you picked it up, I more wish to know where. The chimera stoat prompted, watching his student carefully. I'm self-taught. I lived in a somewhat rough part of the neighborhood, it was something I just had to pick up. He informed the principal, still holding the cup of tea in his hands. The principal couldn't help but notice the lived, meaning as in the past tense. He lived somewhere new. And if I may ask, what were you and Yagi-san doing before you entered my office? The principal asked, sipping the poisoned tea. Simply debating if you can become a hero without a quirk. I was, of course, all for it. Izuku explained, head bobbing slightly as he set his tea down. He didn't think so? Nezu asked, furrowing his non-existent eyebrows. Nope. The hero student said, popping the peach as he shook his head lightly. Fellow's rather quirkiest, actually. I met him back before my quirk manifested, told me I couldn't be a hero without a quirk. Which is exactly why my drive is what it is. Nezu tilted his head to the side. What's your drive? Motherfucking all, just watch me become a goddamn hero. Katsuki Bakugo was the most violent student Yude had ever had, it was confirmed. Usually Aizawa Shoyuda wasn't one to get into any student or teacher drama, but this was completely out of hand. Green-haired problem child looked close to death when he'd stepped out of the fight. Yude had had its fair share of bullies, but this? Hell, if Katsuki wasn't an excellent student on paper, Aizawa would have expelled him. Not to mention All Might's reckless teaching. He was meant to run them through the basics, not pitch them in a fight to the death while watching one get beat almost to the point of unconsciousness. I am here. Coming through the door like a normal person. All Might screeched, busting through the door very much not like a normal person. The poor person who'd have to put all the screws back in place. The class reacted in cheers and shouts of excitement and awe, too busy to notice their three peers who reacted rather differently to the blonde man's arrival. Shoto Todoroki rolled his eyes at the man groaning quietly as he went back to his book. Shinso Hitoshi glared at the board behind the man, looking disgruntled and tired at best. Izuku Midoriya balled his hands into fists under the desk, actually slamming his head into it as well. Well, softly falling onto it face first would be a better description, as his forehead was not bruised nor did it make a loud noise. Welcome to the most important class at UA High, Hero NG 101. The man proclaimed loudly, as the students cheered. Here, you will learn the basics of being a pro, and what it means to fight in the name of good. Shoto watched as Bakugo let little explosions spark in his hands. Let's get into it. Today's lesson will pull no punches. We're doing fight training. Real combat? Izuku almost spat out. Luckily, he managed to make it sound more like a gasp than a judgmental comment. Fight training? Was the man insane? You're putting almost 20 kids, most who have no idea what the rules or safety measures are in fighting like this, up against each other? 21 kids? The greenette was so getting All Might in trouble for this. The next class he had was Nezu's, and they basically had allotted time specifically for complaining about things. But one of the keys of being a hero is... Oh right, All Might was still talking. Looking good. Yep, he was insane. Costume holders popped out of the walls, names plastered onto the tubs. These were designed for you based on your quirk registration forms and the requests you sent in before school started. The other students started to cheer, and the youngest watched Shoto perk up slightly, and Hitoshi had a grin on his face. Well, those two thought they were the only ones with good costumes, huh? Costumes? Someone called out, Izuku identifying the voice as Tsu's. Get yourselves suited up, and then meet me at training ground beta. He shouted, and others quickly cheered along with him. The bean and the grape, however, stood up to get a head start with their costumes. The man may be All Might, but they still wanted to be there fast. After grabbing his costume, or, more accurately, the bag that held his costume, the hero student took of running, Hitoshi still reaching his from the plastic tub. He circled into a toilet stall, locking the door as he threw on the costume. He was proud of the design, and knew himself lucky that he could draw well. He was actually excited to see what Tokoyami's costume would look like. It seemed the boy would have to improvise to use dark shadow correctly, as the entity seemed unable to move through walls or material, so the costume would have to account for that. Plus, he had no doubt it would look awesome. Unlocking the stall, Izuku came out in his costume. The theme was black and green, the favoring more to green than black as to draw away suspicion. He had no mouthguard as Aizawa would know it from a mile away, and he was almost definite the man had suspicions. Damn it, Eraserhead, stop being really smart all of the time. The costume consisted of a padded green suit with black shoulder and knee accents, as well as a black screen that went over his eye. He had secret slits in his costume that he inserted his, totally not smuggled, knives into, meaning he could simply pull one out with his quirk or his arms. Wow, Mito bro, you look so manly, Kirishima called out, waving at him. Oh, thanks Kirishima. Your costume L looks pretty cool teach too. Damn his stutter when near new people. Ah, Midoriya-kun. Tokoyami greeted. I see you to have gone for an eye feature. Tokoyami's costume consisted of a black cloth and hood, making him look like a dark Robin Hood. The cloak didn't fall onto his chest, just went out behind him a bit. He had the same sort of screen that went over his eye, except for the fact that it went over both his eyes, was red, and you could see it wrapping around his head instead of attaching to the ear like Izuku's. So the greenette was right, Tokoyami looked cool as fuck. Wow, teach Tokoyami. Are your glasses just for show or do they serve a purpose for mobility? Have you ever tried teleporting dark shadow or phasing him through walls at all? I have a theory that it could be done with concentration, but I am unaware of how your quirk works. Have you ever thought about the effect electricity would have on dark shadow? Not like a harmful amount or anything, just if he could use it to his, or your, advantage? Have dash. Alright Aizu, don't talk his ears off. I thought you got that out with me this morning. Hitoshi cut the green-haired boy off, nudging him slightly. Sorry I didn't mean to ramble. The younger blushed, a hand rubbing the back of his neck as he asserted his gaze. For a few moments, the changing room was silent. That was amazing. Denki shouted. How'd you come up with so many ideas? Their classmate blinked at them, pleasantly surprised. Yes, Midoriya-kun, you've only seen Dark Shadow in action a few times yesterday. How did you know he couldn't go through physical objects? Tokoyami added, curious. It's easy to spot if you pay attention. First you used Dark Shadow to sweep through the running teak track, and I had my suspicions when he coughed at the dust. If he was incorporeal, then it shouldn't have affected him, right? I was confirmed in the climbing activity when you actually wrapped him around a branch. That must have meant that he could physically interact with objects. Then again in the balance trials, he could have phased through to get the timer but didn't. He explained, re-encountering the events. That is amazing, Kirishima stated. Izuku shook his head and laughed. How very observant of you, Izuku-kun. Shoto said, and the greenette decided that that was probably the closest thing he'd get to praise from Todoroki. So he sent the boy one of his smiles, because that makes people feel better. He did not notice the blush on Shoto's face as he turned away. Yes, what a sound observation, Ida declared, hand-chopping. Thank you for your input, Midoriya. It's no problem, really, I'm just really observant. Why do you believe Dark Shadow could phase through things? The Raven hybrid asked, looking curiously at the green-haired boy. Well, once again I don't know the exacts of your quirk, beads, but sentient quirks are usually incorporeal in some state, right? So, if Dark Shadow follows teach this pattern, then you should be able to control that incorporeal state. It'd mean gaining more control over your quirk first, but in theory, he's a descendant from your parents' quirks, right? If either of them have a shadow quirk, then Dark Shadow is probably either your brother or a quirk mutation. Meaning, shadow. Shadows aren't physical things, they're like illusions, but our minds perceive them as physical. It's an unconscious thing, you don't really think about it. Anyway, Dark Shadow's kinda like the same thing, we perceive him physical, so he's anchored as physical. With time and concentration, you can kind of unlearn that way of thinking about him and he becomes an incorporeal being, see? The younger explained. He often wrote these things down, but he hadn't spoken them aloud since elementary. The male of 1A soon realized that there were two sides to Midoriya. You see one first, and then if you get to know him, you see the other. Or he accidentally starts rambling and gets really confident. What the fuck? Why does that make so much sense? Where did you learn to do that? Ever taken an IQ test? You sure you don't have like 3 quirks? Do you have an intelligence quirk? Izuku glanced at Hitoshi for help. His friend sighed, but threw him a fond, tired but fond, smile. All right, listen up. No, Iza doesn't have an intelligence quirk, he's just smart like that. Yes, he's taken an IQ test, but he refuses to tell me what his score was. He taught himself how to do it. It makes sense because Izuku said it, and we've been in here a little too long and I wouldn't doubt the girls are already out there, so let's go. Hitoshi smiled as they all mumbled curses and started exiting the door. And then Bakugo just had to speak up. It's just some dumb theory anyway, nerds not even that smart. Hey, not manly, Bakubro. Mito bro obviously worked hard to come up with such a sound theory. Kirishima defended him. Hitoshi nodded, following the rest out the door, pulling Katsuki out with him. The greenette quickly followed out behind them just to see the girls trailing out of their locker room looking slightly guilty. Izuku raised an eyebrow at them. Heard your conversation? Uraraka spilt, looking sorry. Oh, I thought you'd done something bad. Nah, that's fine. Izuku smiled at them, motioning to join the rest of the group. He watched Uraraka light up, grabbing the others to join their little group. Hey, maybe today wasn't so bad after all. Izuku was quickly proven wrong on his theory. Today was very, very bad. Now that you're ready, it's time for combat training. All Might shouted, seeing them all emerge. Sir? Ida shouted, raising his hand. All Might nodded somewhat impatiently. This is the fake city from our entrance exam. Does that mean that we'll be conducting urban battles again? Not quite. I'm going to move you 2 steps ahead. God, what did the big oaf gotten for them now? Most of the villain fights you see on the news take place outside. However, statistically speaking, run-ins with the most dastardly evildoers take place indoors. All Might explained proudly. Well, maybe the man was giving them so good advice after all. Think about it. Backroom deals, home invasions. Wow, okay, the small crime approach, not bad. Secret underground lairs, and there it was. Truly intelligent criminals stay hidden in the shadows. For this training exercise, you'll be split into teams of good guys and bad guys and fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. He explained. Oh no, he was not. Isn't this a little advanced? Izuku decided to pipe up. The best training is what you get on the battlefield. No, it really wasn't. But remember, you can't just punch a robot this time. You're dealing with actual people now. He did not just say that. Sir, will you be the one deciding who wins? Ida asked. How much can we hurt the other team? Katsuki asked, grinning evilly. Do we need to worry about the losers getting expelled like earlier? Uraraka asked. Will you be splitting us up based on chance or comparative skill? I wasn't finished talking. The number 1 pro shouted. Then he took out a sheet of paper. Listen up. A script? Seriously? The situation is this. The villains have hidden a nuclear missile somewhere in their hideout. The heroes must try to foil their plans. The class had quieted down by then. To do that, the good guys either have to catch the evildoers or recover the weapon. Likewise, the bad guys succeed if they protect their payload or capture the heroes. God, this sounds like an action movie setup. Time's limited, and we'll choose teams by drawing lots. Isn't there a better way? Ida asked. At least he's asking the real questions now, but sadly, Izuku did need to do well. Think about it. He called. Pros often have to team up with heroes from other agencies on the spot, so maybe that's the reason we're seeing that here. Ida nodded. Yes, I see. Life is a random series of events. Excuse my rudeness, he called, bowing his head as he did. No sweat. Let's draw. Luckily, Izuku was paired with Hitoshi. Unluckily, they were against Kaken and Ojiro. You sure you'll be okay, Green Bean? Hitoshi asked, pulling Izuku off to the side. We could ask for a different partner, Dash? No, Hito, it'll be fine. Come on, let's go see if we'll be the heroes or villains of this place. The greenette smiled weakly. He watched his friend closely. All right, Green Bean. Let's go. The two quickly swept back into the crowd, Shoto throwing them a concerned, but somehow still indifferent, look. And the hero team Isis, Katsuki Bakugo and Masahiro Ojiro. All Might shouted out. Hell yes, get to be the villains Dash. Izuku? Sorry Hito. He squeaked. Hey, don't blame him if the villains got all the cool plans. Alright you four. Villains, go set up. All Might shouted. The duo ran off quickly, a plan already forming in the local greenette's head. So, already know what we're going to do? Hitoshi asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Shinso's costume consisted of the colors white, lilac, and black. The mask did look somewhat villainous on him, but his costume didn't complement that look. He had on a white jumpsuit with a lilac spiral on it and a black collar. The mask, though mostly black, had a red ace on the front of it. Unbeknownst to most, if you looked closely, Izuku had a red ace on his glass eye accent. They were matching, giving people a small hint. Not that they'd catch on, of course. Hitoshi's shoes were black, but they served a purpose. The heels had a small handle-like accent to them, and that was because the heels held knives, just like Izuku's elbows. Luckily for those two, if they got caught with the smuggled knives, well, uncertain green-haired student knew the principle. And, as found out yesterday, Nezu was more than happy to bend the rules for the duo. Dropping out of the vents and on top of midnight had been extremely funny, though Shinso didn't appreciate how he had Nezu's class when Shinso had midnights. Besides, All Might wouldn't try anything. He wasn't smart enough to do that. Besides, even if he was already on thin ice with the U-Data principle. He wouldn't mess with the boy who had one. Beat Nezu at chess in 2. Seemed to be able to flip personalities faster than the gods in Percy Jackson. Yeah, of course I know what we're doing. Are you gonna tell me? Hitoshi huffed. The greenette smirked. Here's the plan. The boys spread out. Shinso did as Izuku said, propelling himself up on the roof from outside and staying just below the eyeline of anyone on the rooftop. Izuku started to set up his part of the plan, dragging the crates towards the bomb. Come on, Katsuki, work with me Dash. No. Those extras are probably planning now. I'm going in. Bakugo angrily cut him off, blasting himself up the building. Ojiro sighed and swung after the explosive blonde, using his tail as support. The duo quickly arrived at the rooftop. The tailed boy pulled himself up to see Bakugo aiming his hands straight at the floor. No. You can't. It'll bring the building down. Ojiro shouted, panicking. That's the plan, extra. He was about to shoot. Katsuki, listen. Ojiro shouted out again. Except, Ojiro didn't speak. He gasped, going to stop Katsuki, but it was already way too late. Eno, you stupid X-dash. Bakugo stopped in his tracks, body tensing up and eyes glazing over. Step away from Ojiro, run inside the building to the second floor. Hitoshi commanded. Ojiro tried to rush into Katsuki, but he was already running away. The short-haired teenager followed Katsuki in the building. If he caught up with him, then any kind of bumping or disruptive motion from a human could easily shake the boy out of the trance he was in. He didn't hear the Phase 1 complete, initiate Phase 2. Coming from the rooftop he'd just left. He'd completely forgotten about the lilac-haired boy, unluckily. Just as Midoriya had planned it, unfortunately. When you were on the opposing side, you never wanted things to go the way Midoriya had planned. But then again it was hard for it not to. Especially when he was kind of a tactical genius. Phase 1 complete, initiate Phase 2. Crouching in the crate he was hiding in, Izuku watched as Katsuki entered the room in a daze. If Hitoshi wasn't very careful about this, they'd have to switch to Plan Beta, essential full-out confrontation, and near the nuke too. But if both Shinso and Izuku did their best, the greenette had no doubt they could pull this plan off. They simply had to get Bakugo in a blind spot to tape him up before he realized what was going on, facing Ojiro. That way he'd most likely fire at Ojiro, giving Shinso enough time to double round and tape up the tailed boy. Of course, they had Plan B, But it wasn't too much different from Plan C, so they'd combined the plans to make Plan Beta. Ojiro followed in after Katsuki seconds later, rounding the corner in delight. Hitoshi better be arriving soon, the raisin. Bakugo! Screw it, no time to wait for Hitoshi, Izuku had to act now. Quickly double rolling out of the barrel, the greenette jumped to secure the capture tape to the blonde's arm, successfully jumping over Ojiro's swinging tail. Doubling over himself, the hero student whipped around to face his childhood torturer classmate, once again playing against the other blonde's tail as he backflipped towards the former. Grappling Kaken arm, Izuku secured him with capture tape as the louders snapped out of his trance, firing straight at Ojiro. And Shinso was pulling the boy out of the way. With a roll of capture tape. Silently celebrating his victory, he barely ducked the explosive punch from the now captured boy next to him. Hey, it's over. Stop fighting. The younger hissed, once again dodging an attack from the ex-friend. The kick this time, though still explosive. No wonder he made his costume cover him, it produced more sweat that way. Hero never stops fighting. I won't stop until I come out on top. The explosive boy screeched, throwing himself at the smaller. A right hook, Kachin's classic ever since he'd taken that week-long karate course. But poor Izuku terrified, and he couldn't stop being reminded of just how much this was like middle school. So, he did the only thing his already autopilot mode mind could think of. He grabbed Katsuki's arm. His hand would have been too dangerous, his mind supplied, and flipped him over the greenette's head. In Izuku's defense, he'd only gotten 3 hours of sleep last night, and he was very close to a PTSD breakdown, and goddammit, why did Kaken have it so stubborn? When Bakugo was still shocked, the hero student was still unclear in whatever the fuck he was doing, he just knew that Kaken had attacked and now he was fighting back. Unluckily for Katsuki, that meant the greenette wasn't taking any bullshit, so without hesitance, he kicked him out a window and called a knife into his hand. Damn it, you nerd. When do you learn to do that? Bakugo screeched, flipping himself back inside the room. Hey Katsuki. Shinso tried, but it was obvious the blonde already knew better, simply flipping off the purple-haired boy. Damn it, that totally should have been counted for a response. Why wasn't All Might stopping Bakugo? This was obviously both against the rules and getting dangerous. Plus, the younger had a knife. It was never good when Midoriya had a knife. Arf! The louder shrieked, once again throwing himself at the troublesome greenette. Sidestepping, autopilot barely even in place anymore, the youngest threw his leg in the other's path, tripping him up and leaving him completely open for a few seconds. The boy quickly took his chance, thrusting the blonde forwards as he teleported to meet him and once again shove him back. The blonde retaliated with an explosion blast, but his opponent essentially pirouetting off the wall he was thrown into. Putting his weight on his somewhat uninjured shoulder, Izuku threw the boy away from him just a little too late. He took a nasty burn to the shoulder, and another to his cheek. Hissing in irritation, Katsuki's opponent evaded his next attacks gracefully before delivering a quick blow to the chest himself. The greenette made a mistake, however. He swirled in towards Bakugo at the chest attack to avoid the explosive's left hook, tripping straight into the blonde as the both of them fell out the window. Hitoshi left a protesting Ojiro to help his friend, who immediately undid his capture tape to help as well. Shit, green bean, Hitoshi called, watching as Izuku bounced up to join Katsuki for hand-to-hand. They had fallen, but Bakugo had been focused on saving himself and not helping Midoriya in the slightest. He'd thrown the boy off using explosives, landing on his back while Izuku on his head and upper back, gasping. He bleeding badly and wasn't looking very steady on his feet. Seems you can dodge everything. Well then dodge this? The younger's eyes darted around for an escape, but they were cornered in between two buildings now, and Kaken was preparing to fire the big guns. So Izuku did the one thing he could think of to distract him. Play the villain. Well, he chuckled darkly. Looks like you've caught me in my cough act. Heh! Katsuki shouted, hand wavering, but not lowering. Ah, but you've forgotten, little hero, what about the nuke upstairs? 00302. What? Bakugo gasped. No. 0 on midnight. And the time is up. Team Villains has won. All Might's voice boomed through the stadium, and Izuku sighed in relief. Hito. Might need recovery, girl. Think I'm going to pass out now. The greenette mumbled, and Hitoshi was down there fast, helping a nearly but not quite unconscious friend towards Recover Girl, who was now rushing out towards the pair, barely containing his rage for the blonde. Above them the class felt sick,